The girl they threw away became the queen they couldn't survive. Elyra Voss had royal blood and a peasant's dignity, and every soul in the Silver Crown Palace made sure she knew the difference. For 19 years, she ate silence for breakfast and endured contempt like a second skin. Then she ran, rode into a war that wasn't hers, and fate, that vicious, indifferent engine, put her helmet in the hands of the one man built to destroy her family name. Stay with me to the end. This one's going to break something open in you. Hit like drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my people are watching from. The morning they announced her betrothal, Elyra Voss was eating alone in the servants' corridor. Not because she had to. She had a seat at the royal table, a chair near the far end, close enough to the draft from the north-facing window that her fingers went numb by the second course. She had learned early that the assigned seat and the welcome were two different things, and sitting in a chair where nobody wanted you was its own particular species of humiliation. So she ate in the corridor. She'd been doing it for 11 years. The kitchen staff left a plate outside the door without being asked. They didn't knock. They understood. She was 19 years old and she had trained herself to need very little. The announcement came by herald. She heard it through stone walls. The flat, ceremonial voice carrying down the corridor, the way sound moved through old castles, bouncing off cold rock and arriving stripped of warmth. Prince Aldrich Fenmore of the Eastern Reaches. A political match. Binding in 30 days. Elyra set down her bread. She didn't cry. Crying required the belief that someone might eventually hear you, and she had stopped carrying that belief a long time ago. What moved through her instead was something quieter and more dangerous. The specific, crystalline clarity that comes when a person realizes they have run out of acceptable options. She thought about Aldrich Fenmore. She had met him twice. He was 43 years old, had buried 2 wives, and had the eyes of a man who considered women to be a category of property distinguished from horses, mainly by their capacity for conversation. The Eastern Reaches were cold, mountainous, and 3 weeks' hard ride from anyone who might notice if a young queen stopped appearing at public functions. She sat in the corridor for a long time. Then she went to the stables. This is the moment worth examining. Not the fear, which was real and present, and would have excused almost any response. What Elyra Voss did in that corridor was something far rarer. She felt the full weight of the trap closing around her. She measured it clearly. She refused to flinch away from what it meant. And then she made a choice not from panic, but from a kind of cold, absolute refusal. An alpha doesn't announce herself with roaring. She announces herself by moving when everything around her has been designed to make her freeze. That morning, in a servant's corridor that smelled of old bread and candle smoke, a queen was made. Not crowned, not recognized, but made. And nobody in the Silver Crown Palace was paying close enough attention to see it. The stables were on the eastern side of the palace grounds, far enough from the main halls that the smell of horses and hay replaced the constant perfume of beeswax and courtly ambition. Elyra had spent more time in the stables than anywhere else in the palace, a fact that had generated its share of commentary from the noble daughters who saw it as further evidence of her unsuitability. She had never bothered to explain that the horses had simply been better company. The head groom was a weathered man named Cass, who had served the palace since before Elyra was born. He watched her come through the stable doors with the specific quality of attention he reserved for things he understood but was not going to comment on. "Storm's 3-legged again," he said, not looking up from the saddle he was treating. "Left 4? Need him?" "No," Elyra said. "I need the gray." The gray was a military horse, a big-boned destrier that had been retired from active service after taking an arrow through the hindquarters during a border skirmish 2 years earlier. He had healed badly enough that nobody rode him for ceremony, and well enough that he was still rideable. He was bad-tempered, ugly, and too large for elegant maneuvering. He was exactly what she needed. Cass looked up then. "Where are you going?" he said. It wasn't a question. Elyra met his eyes. "I don't know yet." The old man held her gaze for a long moment. Then he set down the saddle oil, pushed himself upright with the careful economy of a man whose knees had been complaining for years, and walked to the back of the stable without another word. When he came back, he was carrying a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. Provisions, she realized, dried meat and hard bread and a skin of water, more than she could have put together herself in the time she had. "Remount post at Halveck's Crossing," he said, setting the bundle down. Third stall from the left. Brown mare, white sock on the right fore. She ain't pretty, but she's quiet and she don't tire easy. He paused. Storm'll need to be walked twice tomorrow. Tell whoever you tell. Cass, don't, he said. Just that. Don't thank me. Don't explain. Don't make this into something we'll have to acknowledge later. She nodded once. He walked back to his work. The gray's name was Ash, and he tried to bite her twice while she was saddling him, which she considered an honest expression of his general philosophy. She didn't blame him. She got the bridle on him with the particular patience of someone who has learned that most things worth having require you to absorb their resistance without making it worse. And then she led him out of the stable into the pale, cold morning. Nobody stopped her. That was the thing about being invisible. It worked in all directions. She rode east. The war had been running for 11 years, which meant it had been running for most of Elyra's conscious life. It existed in the background of everything the way weather existed, a constant condition that shaped decisions and moods and possibilities without most people examining its origins too closely. The official account, delivered in formal language by court historians and repeated in palace education, was that the Draven Empire had attacked first. Border aggression, territorial ambition, a young empire's hunger. Elyra had grown up absorbing this account the way she had absorbed most things in the palace, with the surface attention of compliance and the deeper attention of skepticism. She had read the border dispatches when she could get access to them, which was not often and not officially. She had listened to soldiers in the lower halls when they thought nobody worth worrying about was in the vicinity. She had noticed the specific quality of evasion that entered her father's posture whenever anyone asked direct questions about what exactly had happened in the year before the first engagement. She did not have conclusions. She had suspicions, which were different, and she had learned the discipline of holding suspicions as suspicions and not converting them prematurely into certainties. What she knew for certain was that the border was 3 days' hard ride east, that there was active fighting in the Grey March region, and that the Kingdom of Voss had been conscripting soldiers from every town of any size for 2 years running. She also knew that conscript columns moved in the open, traveled with minimal security, and contained enough chaos in their organization that one more rider in military clothing could join the tail end of a column without generating immediate scrutiny. She had Ash, who looked like a military horse because he was one. She had the bundle from Cass. She stopped at a market town a half-day's ride from the palace, traded a silver ring she'd been wearing since she was 16 for a set of used soldier's clothing. Thick wool trousers, a heavy jacket, a dented but functional breastplate that someone had been trying to sell for 3 months, and changed in the back room of the trading post while the vendor pretended to organize his stock. She wrapped her hair tight and pinned it flat against her skull. The helmet, which she'd found in the bottom of the bundle Cass had packed along with everything else. The old man had been more prepared for this morning than she had been, covered most of what was left. She looked in the small metal mirror the vendor kept on his wall. She looked like a young male soldier, undistinguished, a little thin, exactly the kind of soldier nobody remembered. She rode out before noon and joined the tail end of a conscript column moving east by mid-afternoon. Nobody asked her name. Nobody looked at her twice. The soldiers around her were tired, underfed, and focused primarily on their own misery, which was the most reliable kind of camouflage. This is the psychology of the invisible made useful. Every year, Elyra had spent being looked through, being dismissed, being treated as furniture in rooms full of people who mattered. Every one of those years had given her a skill that nobody had intended to teach her. She knew how to be present without being seen. She knew how to move through spaces where she didn't belong and let other people's assumptions do the work of her disguise. The palace had given her nothing of what it owed her, but it had given her that, and she was going to use it. The Grey March region looked nothing like the maps. The maps showed clean lines, territories, boundaries, strategic positions rendered in ink that made the whole thing appear ordered and legible. The Grey March itself was a fractured landscape of rolling hills and narrow river cuts and dense stands of pine that had been turned, over 11 years of back-and-forth fighting, into a maze of burned ground and temporary fortifications and supply lines that existed mainly in the optimistic thinking of officers who hadn't been to the front in months. Elyra spent 3 days in the column before they reached the forward staging area. She kept her head down, did her share of the camp labor without being asked, and listened. This was something she had always been good at. The particular patience of someone who knows that information lives mostly in the things people say when they're not thinking about who's listening. She learned that the Draven forces had been pushing the Voss lines back for 6 weeks. She learned that 3 of the senior Voss commanders had been recalled to the capital for strategic consultation, officially, though the soldiers said recalled with the specific inflection of men who believed the real reason was that the king didn't want competent people close to the front making decisions he hadn't pre-approved. She learned that the thing everyone in the camp was afraid of, but not saying directly, was that the line was going to break, and that when it broke, the retreat was going to be ugly. She learned on the 3rd night, sitting at the edge of a fire where nobody had invited her, but nobody had told her to leave either, that the Draven Crown Prince was leading the push personally. "Kaelin Draven," said a soldier across the fire. A veteran, she thought, from the way he held himself, the specific kind of tired that came from years rather than weeks. He's been at every major engagement this campaign. Fights in the front line too, which is either stupid or something else. "Something else," said another man without looking up from his boot, which he was relacing with the concentrated focus of someone who has learned to treat small maintenance tasks as meditation. "My cousin was at the Halvek Ridge engagement 2 months back. Said the man came through the smoke on foot, armor open at the shoulder where something had caught him, bleeding like a pig and still fighting. Said there's something wrong with him." "Wrong how?" said the first man. "Wrong, like he doesn't register pain the way you and me do. Like he made some kind of arrangement." The second soldier finished the lace and looked up. "Or like he's running toward something and pain just isn't loud enough to get his attention." The fire crackled. Nobody said anything for a while. Elyra kept her eyes on the flames and stored what she'd heard in the careful part of her mind where she kept things that mattered. She thought about a man who fought like he was looking for something in the violence. She thought about what kind of history would produce that quality of forward momentum. She thought, with the particular instinct of someone who had spent years learning to read rooms through necessity, that Crown Prince Kaelin Draven was probably not the man described in the Voss court histories. She didn't know yet what that meant. The engagement came on the 5th day. It came at dawn, the way the bad ones almost always did. The light still gray and uncertain, the camp still shaking itself awake. The sentries rotating off their watches with the reduced attention of men who have been doing a night shift and are thinking about sleep and not about what might be moving in the tree line. Elyra heard it before she saw it, the specific quality of alarmed shouting that was different from ordinary camp noise in ways that the body registered before the mind caught up. She was on her feet and moving before she'd consciously decided to move, and she understood, as she grabbed the sword she'd requisitioned from the column's equipment stores 3 days earlier, that she had been preparing for exactly this moment for 19 years without knowing it was what she was preparing for. The Draven forces came out of the pine stand to the northeast in 2 waves. The first wave was cavalry, heavy riders on dark horses, moving in the tight wedge formation that meant they were planning to punch through a specific point rather than spread along a front. The second wave came behind at a run, infantry moving fast enough that they'd clearly been held ready and close, waiting on the cavalry to create the opening. The Voss camp had roughly 30 seconds between the sentries raising the alarm and the first riders hitting the outer perimeter. In those 30 seconds, Elyra watched the people around her and made a series of assessments that she would not have known to make a week earlier. She saw who froze and who moved. She saw where the natural defensive positions were in the camp layout and which ones the officers were failing to use. She saw the specific gap in the perimeter defense, northwest corner, where a supply wagon had been parked at an angle that blocked the line of sight, that the cavalry wedge was going to find whether the Draven commanders had scouted it or just gotten lucky. She could have stayed where she was. She could have kept her head down and let the engagement wash over her and survived it in the chaos of confusion. Instead, she ran for the northwest gap and started shouting. She didn't think about it analytically. The decision came from somewhere beneath the level of strategy, from the same place that had stood up in the servants' corridor and said, "Not this, not Aldrich Fenmore, not 30 days and no way out." She ran to the gap because it was the thing that needed doing, and she could see it, and whoever was supposed to be paying attention wasn't. Northwest, the wagon, pull it forward, close the line. A sergeant materialized out of the chaos. A big man with a cropped beard and the kind of expression that meant he was about 2 seconds from telling her who she thought she was. Then the cavalry wedge hit the perimeter 40 feet to her right, with a sound like a hammer striking an anvil, and the sergeant made a different calculation. "You three, wagon, move it now!" The gap closed. Barely. Not perfectly. But the wedge hit solid resistance instead of open ground, and the shock of it disrupted the formation enough that the second rider in the point cracked into the first, and for about 15 seconds the whole front of the Draven cavalry push was in confusion. 15 seconds was enough for the Voss line to partially reform. Elyra found herself in the middle of the fighting without a clear memory of how she got there. This was something she had read about, the way sustained stress collapses the recording of time, leaves gaps in the sequence where the body just acts and the conscious mind tries to catch up afterward. She was fighting. She was good at it, which surprised her less than it probably should have. She had been training in the palace armory since she was 14, quietly, with the same determination she applied to everything she wanted that nobody was going to give her. The world reduced itself to the immediate. Sound became directional information. Movement became calculation. She stopped thinking in words. This is the truth that no court philosopher ever put in writing, but that every person who has survived genuine violence knows. The thinking self is mostly useless in the moment of real danger. What serves you is the part underneath the thinking, the part that has been trained and shaped and tested and made ready without your conscious knowledge of what it was being made ready for. Elyra Voss had been in a different kind of fight her entire life. She had just never had a sword in her hand while she was doing it. She didn't know in the middle of it how long the engagement lasted. It felt like it lasted a long time, and also like it happened very fast, which was something else she had read about and now understood from the inside. What ended it for her was not a decision. It was a horse. A Draven rider came through the breaking line from the northeast at full gallop. Not cavalry formation, not the wedge, but a single horse moving with the specific speed of command, a rider who was not charging into a fight, but cutting through it, reading the field from height, making the kind of assessments that a field commander makes when he's trying to understand what's happening across an entire engagement simultaneously. She saw the rider for less than a second before the horse struck her a glancing blow with its shoulder. Not a direct hit, not intentional, but the edge of a half-ton animal moving at 30 miles per hour, which was still enough to lift her off her feet and throw her into the remains of a supply cart 8 feet away. She hit the cart, and the cart hit the ground, and she hit the ground, and for a moment everything went the bright white of impact. The helmet came off. She registered this before she registered pain. The specific sensation of cold air against her face and head, the sudden exposure that told her the thing keeping her invisible was gone. She was reaching for it before she'd fully come back to herself, moving on instinct, her fingers closing around the strap. Hold. The voice was low, not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the specific quality of authority that doesn't come from volume, that comes from something else entirely, and it cut through the surrounding noise the way a blade cuts through rope, clean and immediate. She stopped moving. Not because she chose to, because every nerve in her body responded before the choice arrived. She looked up. The rider had dismounted. He was standing 10 feet from her, and he was the largest man she had ever seen outside of palace ceremonial guards, which meant he was large in a way that had been built rather than inherited. The kind of size that comes from years of specific work, not from having tall parents. His armor was black, unpainted iron, dented in 3 places that she could see, and he was bleeding from a cut above his left temple that had tracked blood down the side of his face in a line that had dried and cracked in the morning cold. He was looking at her with an expression she had no category for, not recognition, not triumph. Not the calculating assessment of a commander evaluating a captured combatant. Something else. Something that looked almost like being struck, like seeing something you had not prepared for and had no language to accommodate. His eyes were dark, and they were entirely on her face, and they had the quality of a man who has just walked into a room expecting one thing and found something that reorganized every assumption he was carrying. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was different now, still low, but something had changed in it, a roughness under the command, something that wasn't calculated. Elyra had spent 19 years being looked at like she didn't matter. She had been examined and found wanting and dismissed and erased in 1,000 small ways by 1,000 people who considered themselves qualified to make that assessment. Nobody had ever looked at her the way this man was looking at her. It frightened her in a way the battle hadn't. "Nobody," she said. Her voice came out level. This surprised her. The man took one step toward her, then stopped, like he'd caught himself doing something he hadn't authorized. "You're bleeding," he said. She was. She hadn't noticed. The collision with the cart had opened something along her jaw. She could feel it now that he'd said it, the warm tracking of blood along the side of her face. "So are you," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something that was surprised out of him rather than offered. The fighting around them had changed character. She became aware of it gradually, the quality of sound shifting, the shouting moving further east, which meant the Draven push was through, or the Voss line had broken, or some combination of both. The immediate space around them had become, without her noticing the transition, something separate from the wider engagement. The man crouched down in front of her, close enough that she could see the cut at his temple clearly, the dried blood that had tracked into the edge of his hairline, the way his jaw was set with the particular tension of someone managing something through will. He reached toward her face. She went very still. He pulled his hand back. Not quickly, carefully, like he was correcting something rather than responding to her. "You need—" He stopped, tried again. "There's a medical post at the rear of the eastern line. The wound needs to be closed." "I'm aware of how wounds work," Elyra said. "Then act like it," he said. The roughness was more pronounced now, and she understood, with the specific comprehension of someone who has spent years reading people in rooms that didn't want her there, that he was not angry. He was something else, something he didn't have a comfortable relationship with. "Who are you?" she said, giving it back to him. He looked at her for a long moment. Something complicated moved through his face. "Kaelin Draven," he said. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples that moved out from it reorganized everything. The battle, the mourning, the 5 days on the road, and the 3 days in the column, and the 19 years before any of it. She was looking at the crown prince of the empire her father had been fighting for 11 years. The man the soldiers talked about around fires at night. The man who fought like he was looking for something in the violence. He was still looking at her with that expression she had no category for. "And you," he said, "are not nobody." It was not a question. The fighting had moved east. Around them, the field held the specific silence that followed acute violence, present, attentive, threaded with the sounds of men who were hurt and men who were organizing and the distant, persistent sound of combat that hadn't finished yet. Elyra became aware, slowly, that several of the soldiers visible in her peripheral vision were Draven forces. That she was, technically, in the middle of enemy territory with her cover blown and her helmet 6 feet away. That the crown prince of the Draven Empire was crouched 2 feet from her looking at her like she was a problem he couldn't solve and didn't want to put down. She looked at him directly. She had spent 19 years looking at people who wanted her to look away. She did not look away. "My name is Elyra," she said. She left the rest of it unspoken. The rest of it was a different kind of weapon, one she wasn't ready to deploy without knowing the terrain. Something shifted in him when she said it. Subtle. The kind of shift you would miss if you weren't watching carefully, if you hadn't learned to read the specific language of what people's bodies do when their minds are doing something their faces won't show. He stood up, looked east toward the sound of the fighting, looked back at her. "You can't stay here," he said. "I'm not yours to determine that for," she said. The words came out of her before she'd fully thought them through, which was unusual. She was a careful speaker. She had learned to be, in a court where words were currency and being overdrawn could be fatal. But something about this man and this moment and the specific quality of his attention stripped away the habit of caution. He looked at her for a long time. "No," he said finally. "You're not." He turned and called something in the direction of the nearest group of his soldiers. Sharp, directional. 2 words she didn't fully catch. A soldier detached from the group and came at a jog, pulling up a respectful distance back. "She goes to the medical post," Kaelin said. "Full protection. Nobody touches her, nobody questions her. Understood?" My lord. He turned back to her. Whatever had been in his expression before had been reorganized into something more contained, more controlled, but the edges of it were still visible if you knew what to look for, and she did. This doesn't settle anything, he said. I know, she said. It doesn't mean you're safe. I've never been safe, Elyra said. I stopped waiting for it. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned and moved east toward the sound of his fighting men, and she watched him go. And she thought about the specific expression she had seen on his face when he first looked at her. The expression of a man encountering something he had not planned for and could not immediately categorize. She thought about what the soldiers said around the fire. Running towards something, pain not loud enough to get his attention. She thought about what it meant that the crown prince of the Draven Empire had looked at the daughter of his greatest enemy and given her protection without asking for anything in return. She thought about all the things she hadn't told him. The Voss soldier beside her, the one detailed to escort her, was watching her with the careful neutrality of a man following orders he didn't fully understand. Medical post? He said. Yes, Elyra said. She picked up her helmet. She held it in her hands for a moment, turning it over, looking at the dented metal and the cracked cheek guard and the simple, unremarkable shape of a disguise that had served her for 5 days and was now, in some fundamental sense, finished. She did not put it back on. She stood up without being helped. Her jaw throbbed where the blood had dried. Her ribs ached from the collision with the cart. She was standing in the middle of an enemy position, without cover, without alliance, without anything except the blade at her hip and 19 years of practice surviving rooms that didn't want her. She had been in worse situations. Actually, she hadn't. But she had been in situations that had felt this impossible and turned out not to be. She followed the soldier east toward the Draven medical post, and she thought about Kaelin Draven's face. And she thought about the expression that had moved through it when she said her name, and she tried to understand what she had seen there. She didn't have the word for it yet. She would learn it. Ult. The medical post was a series of canvas structures set up behind a natural rise that provided cover from the field. It was efficient in the way military medicine was always efficient. Not comfortable, not gentle, but fast and functional, organized by a field surgeon who moved through the wounded with the specific energy of someone who had made peace with never having enough of anything and had learned to work with what was present. Elyra sat on a low crate while a medic cleaned the cut along her jaw. The medic was a woman of maybe 40, with the kind of hands that had done this 10,000 times and didn't need her eyes to tell them what to do. She didn't speak beyond the necessary minimum. She didn't ask questions. Elyra looked around the post while the woman worked. She cataloged what she saw. Wounded Draven soldiers, organizational patterns, the way commands moved through the medical staff, who deferred to whom and on what kinds of questions. She stored everything. This was not strategy, not yet. It was the habit of a person who had learned that information was the one resource available to someone who had nothing else, and that you gathered it when you could and held it carefully and waited to understand what it meant. Deeper than it looks, the medic said, about the cut. Need to close it properly. Fine, Elyra said. The woman's hands were steady. The needle was curved and the thread was waxed, and the process hurt with the specific, manageable quality of pain that has a clear endpoint. Elyra kept her eyes level and her jaw still and breathed through it. She was aware, at the edge of her attention, of the soldier who had escorted her, standing a respectful distance away, at what she realized was a genuinely protective position, not monitoring her but watching the perimeter around her, following orders with actual seriousness. Kaelin Draven had given those orders. She thought about what she knew of him, which was everything she'd read in court dispatches, which was to say everything her father had chosen to have written down about his enemy, which meant everything shaped by what served the narrative of justified war. She thought about the divergence between that material and the man who had crouched in front of her on a field, still ringing with battle noise, and looked at her like she had knocked every assumption he was carrying clean out of alignment. Her father's great enemy, the man who had, without explanation, given her protection. The medic tied off the last stitch and sat back. Done. Don't work the jaw hard for 2 days. Thank you, Elyra said. The woman looked at her for a moment with the direct, assessing eyes of someone who had spent years in proximity to violence and had learned to sort the people in front of her very quickly. "You're not a conscript," the medic said. "No," Elyra said. The woman nodded once, accepting this the way Cass had accepted it, with the wisdom of someone who understood that some truths were best left the shape they arrived in. She moved on to the next wounded soldier. Elyra sat on the crate and felt, for the first time in 5 days, something that might have been the beginning of exhaustion. She had been holding herself at a sustained level of alertness since the morning in the servants' corridor, and now, in the relative stability of the medical post, with the immediate crisis resolved and someone's expert hands having sorted out her jaw, the machinery of vigilance was running a little slower. She let it, just slightly, just enough to think. She thought about her father's face when he made announcements, the specific quality of stillness he put on when he was performing certainty. She thought about every time she had seen him deflect a direct question about the war's beginning with a different kind of question, a redirect, an appeal to the greater story that everybody already knew and didn't need to re-examine. She thought about what the soldiers had said, about the way the war had been running and where, and what the pattern of it suggested. She thought about a crown prince who had lost his mother to a royal massacre and had spent his entire life preparing to respond to that loss. And she thought about the man those facts would produce, and she tried to make the man in her mind fit the man on the field. She was still working on it when the shouting started at the perimeter. Not battle shouting, different. The specific high-register chaos of a political emergency, voices carrying the shape of hierarchy and crisis in equal measure. A sound she recognized from the palace with the bone-deep familiarity of something you absorb before you have language for it. The soldier who had been guarding her appeared at her side in under 3 seconds. "Stay here," he said, and his voice had changed, not alarmed, but sharpened. "What is it?" Elyra said. He looked toward the perimeter. Something moved through his expression. "A rider came through under a white flag," he said, "from the Voss lines." Elyra went very still. "The rider carries a king's seal," the soldier said, still looking toward the perimeter. "He's asking for a parley." He paused. "He says the king has information about a deserter." The word landed in her stomach like a dropped stone. Deserter. Her father had noticed. Not the betrothal refusal, or not only that. She had ridden into a war zone in stolen military clothing, which, in the strict legal terms of kingdom law, put her squarely in a category that had one resolution, regardless of bloodline, or her father had a different name for what she'd done. He was good at naming things. He had been naming her correctly from a safe distance for 19 years, unwanted, inconvenient, embarrassing. And now he was going to name her something that gave him a formal mechanism. She thought about Kaelin Draven's face when she'd said her name, the shift that had moved through his expression. He didn't know what her name meant yet. He knew her as Elyra, just Elyra. He had no reason to connect that to the Voss bloodline, to the Silver Crown Palace, to the king who was, at this moment, sending a rider with a white flag and a king's seal to a parley. That was going to change. She looked at the soldier beside her, who was still watching the perimeter with the focused attention of a man deciding between competing directives. "Take me to him," she said. The soldier looked at her. "My orders?" "I know what your orders are," Elyra said. "I'm asking you to take me to Prince Kaelin before that rider says what he came here to say." The soldier studied her for a long moment. He was not a stupid man. She could see him running the calculation, measuring what she was asking against what he'd been told, against what he'd observed, against whatever his own judgment said about the woman sitting in front of him with fresh stitches in her jaw and eyes that hadn't dropped during any of it. "Why?" he said. "Because there's something he needs to hear from me first," Elyra said. "And because if he doesn't hear it from me first, I won't get the chance to say it at all." Another long moment. Then the soldier made a decision. "Move fast," he said. Kaelin was at the edge of the perimeter when she reached him. He was talking to 2 of his senior officers, low and rapid, and she could see from 40 feet away that the white flag rider had already arrived and been held at the outer line. She could also see from the specific quality of Kaelin's posture, the way he was holding his shoulders, the angle of his head, that he already knew the rider was waiting and had not decided yet what to do with the information. He turned when she approached. His expression shifted when he saw her. Something going through it quickly. A reassessment. his eyes tracking from her face to the soldier escorting her in back. "I told you to—" "I know what you told him," Elyra said. She stopped 2 feet from him, close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice. "I need 30 seconds. The officers flanking him had the careful non-expression of men trained to stay neutral in situations that were above their pay grade. Kalen looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Give us room," he said to the officers. Not to her. His eyes didn't leave her face. The officer stepped back. "Talk," he said. "The rider from the Voss lines," Elyra said. "He's not here because of a deserter." "Then why?" She held his gaze. 19 years. Every corridor and cold window and left-out chair. Every time she had looked at someone who wanted her to look away and decided not to. Everything that had brought her to this field in a dead man's armor, with a sword she'd taught herself to use, and a name she was about to hand over to the man her father had spent 11 years trying to destroy. "He's here because of me," she said. "My name isn't just Elyra." Kalen waited. "Elyra Voss," she said. "I'm the daughter of King Theron Voss." The silence that followed was absolute. She watched it move through him. Not shock, not exactly, but the specific violence of a fact that arrives and reorganizes everything. She watched him take it in. She watched what it did to his face, the careful control of it, the thing under the control that was less managed. "Say it again," he said. "You heard me." His jaw tightened. The cut above his temple had reopened slightly during the fighting, a thin track of fresh blood at the edge of the dried line, livid against the pale of his skin. He was looking at her the way you look at something that has just revealed a different nature, something that forces a complete reassessment of every decision you've made in the last 3 hours. "The daughter of the man who killed my mother," he said, very quietly, "is standing in my camp, under my protection." "Yes," Elyra said. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. And then, from the direction of the outer perimeter, a voice, carrying, formal, shaped by training and urgency, and something that sounded, even at this distance, like a threat barely contained in official language. "In the name of King Theron Voss, first sovereign of the Silver Crown, I demand parley with the Draven commander regarding the traitor Elyra Voss, hereby stripped of royal standing and condemned." The voice carried on. Elyra didn't hear the rest of it. She was watching Kalen Draven's face, and in his face, she saw something she had not calculated for, something that cut through the reorganizing of facts and the violence of revelation and the impossible architecture of what she had just told him. He was not looking at her like an enemy. He was looking at her like a man who has just been handed a reason to make a decision he'd been avoiding, and the reason is both the worst and the only thing he's ever been given. "Condemned," he said, finishing the word from the herald's voice, which was still going somewhere behind them. His eyes hadn't moved from her face. "They condemned you." "It sounds like it," Elyra said. "Your own father. He's been doing it for 19 years, she said. This is just the first time he put a formal mechanism to it." Something moved through Kalen's face, something that had nothing to do with the war or the politics or the 11 years of killing or the mother who had been murdered by the man whose daughter was standing in front of him. Something older than any of that. "What did you do?" he said. "I refused to marry the man he chose for me," she said. "And then I rode to the front because I'd rather take my chances in a war than spend my life in a cage." The herald was still going. The officers behind them were maintaining their careful distance, but she could feel the pressure of the situation building, the way situations built when they needed a decision and weren't getting one. Kalen looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned toward his officers. "Bring the herald forward," he said. "Full ceremony. I'll receive him at the command post." He turned back to her. His voice dropped. "You stay at my left side," he said. "You say nothing unless I ask you directly. And when this is over—" He stopped. "When this is over," Elyra said. "We're going to have a very long conversation," he said. He turned and walked toward the command post. Elyra stood for one moment in the cold morning, with the stitches fresh in her jaw and the blood dried on her armor, and her father's herald approaching from the perimeter with a condemnation and a king's seal. She thought about the servants' corridor and the bread she'd put down. She thought about Cass handing her the bundle without being asked. She thought about Kalen Draven's face when she'd said her name, and the way he'd looked at her like someone who had just been handed a reason rather than a complication. She squared her shoulders. She walked to his left side. The herald's name was Corvin, and he had the eyes of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that he'd stopped differentiating between kinds. He came through the perimeter with 2 Voss escorts at his flanks, ceremonial, unarmed, more symbol than protection. And he moved with the measured pace of formal protocol, the kind of walk that was designed to project state authority even when the state sending you was making a demand inside enemy territory under a flag of truce. He was good at it. Elyra had seen his kind her entire life. Men whose entire professional value was the ability to carry a king's words into hostile rooms and make those words sound like gravity rather than threat. He saw her when he was still 20 feet from the command post. She watched the specific moment he processed what he was looking at. The Voss princess standing at the left side of the Draven crown prince, stitches fresh in her jaw, armor still marked with the morning's fighting, making no effort to step back or step aside or perform any of the dozen small physical retreats that would have communicated the appropriate deference to the situation. His pace didn't change. His face didn't change. He was too trained for that. But something moved through his eyes that told her he had not expected this particular configuration and was now recalculating everything he'd been sent to say. Good, she thought. Kaelin received the herald standing. This was itself a statement. No chair, no elevated position, no apparatus of formal reception. Just a man in field armor in the open air of a military post, standing with the specific quality of stillness that powerful men learn when they want to remind a room that they don't need furniture to establish what they are. Lord Herald, Kaelin said. The words were neutral. The tone underneath them was not. Corvin stopped at the prescribed distance and performed the minimal bow that protocol required when addressing a foreign crown prince. Lower than he'd give a duke, less than he'd give a king. The exact mathematical degree of respect that communicated that the Voss court acknowledged Kaelin's rank without conceding anything about the relative standing of their kingdoms. Crown Prince Draven, Corvin said, I come under the white flag of parley, bearing a formal instrument from His Majesty King Theron Voss of the Silver Crown. I know what a white flag means, Kaelin said. Say what you came to say. A very slight pause, just enough to register. His Majesty invokes the right of return under the Compact of Halvek, which both our kingdoms are signatory to. The instrument concerns one Elyra Voss, formerly of the royal line of Voss, hereby stripped of title and standing by royal decree issued this morning. Corvin's eyes moved to Elyra with the precision of a man who has practiced not showing what his eyes are doing. His Majesty's position is that the individual in question is a deserter under military law, a traitor under crown law, and by virtue of both, subject to return in judgment by the sovereign authority of Voss. The morning was cold and getting colder. A wind had come up from the north, the kind that smelled like the distant mountains and moved through camp structures with the indiscriminate authority of weather. And his terms, Kaelin said, return of the individual, immediate, under escort. Corvin straightened slightly. His Majesty extends the assurance that this matter need not complicate the existing situation between our kingdoms. The existing situation, Kaelin said. He let the words sit for a moment, examining them with the specific patience of a man who has learned that other people's euphemisms are worth taking apart slowly. You mean the war? The current military engagement, yes. Your king is offering me a war concession in exchange for his daughter. Corvin's jaw tightened. Formerly, I know what he said she is and isn't, Kaelin said. I'm asking what he's offering me for her. This is what authority looks like when it has nothing to prove. Not volume, not aggression, just the flat, unhurried refusal to accept the frame that someone else has tried to build around the conversation. Kaelin Draven stood in the cold morning and reduced the entire formal edifice of the herald's delivery to a transaction, because that was what it was, and naming it that stripped it of the ceremony that was supposed to make it easier to accept. Corvin looked at him with the eyes of a man doing rapid calculations. His Majesty is prepared to offer a temporary cessation of hostilities along the northern sector, Corvin said. 40 days, sufficient for both sides to— 40 days, Kaelin said. He said it the way you repeat something back when you want the person who said it to hear how it sounds. In addition to— His daughter, Kaelin said. That's what he's valuing her at. 40 days of quiet on one sector. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has walked into a room expecting to negotiate and found instead that the other person has chosen not to negotiate at all, has chosen instead to name what's actually happening, which is always the more uncomfortable option. Elyra stood at Kaelin's left side and kept her face level. She had known this was coming. She had known, with the particular certainty of someone who has spent 19 years in proximity to a king who valued everything by what he could get for it, that this was exactly what her father's offer would look like. 40 days. A sector. A clean transaction. Hearing it spoken aloud in a stranger's language, assembled into the arithmetic of a trade, was its own particular experience. She processed it without letting it reach her face. Prince Draven, Corvin said carefully. The Compact of Halvek is a binding instrument. If this individual is on Draven-held ground, she came to Draven-held ground under her own authority, Kaelin said, in military engagement, which puts her under the provisions of... He stopped. Looked at the herald with the particular quality of attention that precedes a decision rather than following one. You've read the compact? Of course. Then you know Article 9. A pause. Article 9 governs combatants who... Article 9 governs any individual who enters military engagement on either side of a recognized boundary and establishes contact with opposing forces before being formally claimed by their originating party. Kaelin's voice was level, academic almost, the voice of a man who has read the documents his opponents are citing and read them more carefully. The originating party's claim is valid only if filed within the period of primary engagement. The engagement this morning began at dawn. Your rider arrived mid-morning. The window under Article 9 closed before you reached my perimeter. Mom... Toltz. Corvin opened his mouth, closed it. This is what it looks like when a man is prepared for one argument and discovers that the argument he prepared for is not the one he's in. The herald had come with the compact as a weapon and found the weapon already disassembled and laid out in pieces before him. His Majesty's legal counsel, Corvin began, can file whatever interpretation they choose, Kaelin said, with whatever body they choose to file it with. In the meantime, he held the herald's gaze with the specific patience of a man communicating that the conversation is nearly over, and he has decided when that happens. You have my answer to the king's request. Bring it to him exactly as I've given it to you. And what answer is that? Corvin said. He kept his voice neutral, but something had come into it that hadn't been there before. A thread of something older and less controlled than professional deference. The compact doesn't apply, Kaelin said, and I don't trade people. The silence was absolute. Corvin looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the specific precision of a man choosing how much of what he's feeling to allow into his face, he turned his eyes to Elyra. Lady Voss, he said. He used the title with the deliberateness of a man making a point. She has no title. The decree said so, but he was using it anyway, and they all knew why. Your father asks that you consider carefully. The decree can be rescinded. There are terms that could be... Corvin, Elyra said. He stopped. How long have you served my father? She said. A pause. 22 years, my lady. Then you know him, she said, not the way a subject knows a king. The way a man who has been in a room with someone for 22 years knows him. She held his gaze. You know what the decree means. You know that the offer being extended right now is the last offer I'll receive that has any resemblance to mercy in it. And you know that if I go back, the terms being discussed today are not the terms I'll live under tomorrow. Corvin said nothing. He was too trained to confirm anything, but he didn't deny it either. Take his answer back to him, Elyra said, exactly as he gave it. Something moved through the herald's face, not agreement, not approval. Something older and quieter, the specific expression of a man who has served a king long enough to recognize the moment when that service has required him to carry something he's not comfortable carrying. He bowed. Precisely the same degree as before. Then he turned and walked back toward the perimeter with his 2 ceremonial escorts, and the sound of the camp filled in behind him, and he was gone. Kaelin stood still for 3 seconds after the herald cleared the perimeter. Then he said, without turning toward her, Walk with me. What? He took her to the edge of the camp where the ground rose toward the pine stand, away from the officers, away from the wounded, away from the organized noise of military routine. The wind was stronger here. It pushed at the pines and made them sound like water moving over stone. He stopped when there was enough space between them and everything else. Article 9, she said. There is no Article 9, he said. The Compact of Halvek has 8 articles. She looked at him. He didn't know that, Kaelin said. Most people don't. I needed him to leave with something he couldn't immediately refute. He looked at the tree line. It buys time, not much. Your father will have his counsel checked by nightfall, and he'll know I invented the legal basis by morning. So this morning's refusal changes nothing permanently and everything temporarily, he said. He turned to look at her. The cut at his temple had stopped bleeding. In the gray morning light, with the dried blood still on the side of his face, he looked like what he was. A man who had been fighting since dawn and was still standing and was now trying to think through something that had no clean answer. Your father is going to respond. The question is how and how fast and whether I've miscalculated how much he wants you back. He doesn't want me back, Elyra said. He wants to close the problem. You're saying he'd rather... I'm saying he stripped my title this morning, Elyra said, before the herald even arrived here. He didn't wait to see how the parley went. He didn't leave himself room to rescind it without looking like he'd reversed course publicly. She paused. That's not the action of a man hoping to negotiate. That's the action of a man who made the decision before he sent the rider. Kaelin was quiet for a moment. This is the particular weight of a truth that confirms something you suspected but hadn't wanted to fully hold yet. He had been running the calculation since she told him her name. What it meant, what her father's involvement meant, what protecting her was going to cost in a conflict that was already 11 years old and still bleeding. He'd made the decision in the moment anyway. The herald's visit had confirmed that the decision was going to have consequences he couldn't fully map yet. Why did you come to the front? He said. I told you. You told me you'd rather take your chances in a war than spend your life in a cage, he said. That's a reason. It's not the whole one. She looked at him for a moment. The wind moved through the pines above them. I've been reading the dispatches for 3 years, she said, whatever access I could get, which wasn't much and wasn't official. She paused. The pattern of the war doesn't match the explanation my father gives for it. He was very still. I don't have evidence, she said. I want to be clear about that. I have suspicion and pattern and the specific quality of evasion that my father uses when he doesn't want to answer a direct question. That's all I have. What's the pattern? He said. Every time the engagement pulls back toward negotiation, anytime there's been a genuine diplomatic opening, something happens to close it. A border incident, an accusation, something that puts the two kingdoms back in positions where talking is impossible. She held his gaze. It's happened 6 times in 11 years. I counted. The wind. The last time, she said, was 4 years ago. There was a provisional meeting scheduled. Trade delegates. Not peace, too early for peace, but the first serious attempt at establishing a channel. She paused. 3 days before the meeting, a Draven supply column was attacked inside Voss territory. 7 men killed. The Draven response closed the diplomatic channel and the engagement escalated for 8 months. I remember the column, Kaelin said. His voice had changed. Quieter, denser. I don't know who ordered the attack, Elyra said. I want to be honest about that. I can't tell you it was my father because I don't have the proof. But I can tell you that when I tried to find the official inquiry into the incident, there wasn't one. And when I asked about it, carefully, through the kinds of indirect questions that give you plausible distance from what you're actually asking, I was told that the matter had been handled. Handled, Kaelin said. That's the word they used. He turned away from her and looked at the tree line. His shoulders were set in the particular way of a man managing something through physical containment, the way you hold your body when what's moving through your mind would move through your body if you let it. His mother had been killed in a royal massacre. That was the foundation of everything, the founding story of his war, the thing that had organized his entire life into a single direction. He had never questioned what caused it, because the cause had always seemed self-evident. House Voss had reached into the Draven court and destroyed the woman who had stood between 2 kingdoms and tried to hold them apart from violence. He had spent 11 years answering that act. Now the daughter of the man he held responsible was standing in front of him in the cold morning, telling him that the war he'd been fighting might have been designed to be unfightable, that someone had been closing every door that opened. Elyra watched him process it. She did not fill the silence. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you could do when someone was genuinely thinking was interrupt them with the sound of your own voice. "Your father," he said finally. "What does he gain from the war continuing?" "Control," she said. "The war gives him an external enemy. External enemies justify everything. The military budget, the consolidation of the noble houses under crown authority, the suppression of anyone who asks inconvenient questions about how the kingdom is being run." She paused. "A king without a war has to answer for his kingdom. A king with a war can always say the kingdom's problems are the war's fault." Kaelin turned back to her. The expression on his face was not the one she'd been expecting. She had expected anger. She had expected the specific quality of fury that comes from discovering that you've been used. What she saw instead was something more complicated. A man who had been carrying one understanding of his life for 11 years and was now holding it next to a different shape and feeling how they failed to fit. "You understand," he said slowly, "that I can't simply accept what you're telling me. I know. I have no reason to trust you. I know that too. You're the daughter of the man who murdered my mother. You came to this front in a disguise, and now you're giving me information that, if it's true, reframes the entire basis of this war in a way that happens to be very convenient for your current situation." "Yes," Elyra said. "All of that is accurate." "So why," he said, "would I believe any of it?" She looked at him steadily. "You wouldn't. You shouldn't. Not based on what I've told you." She paused. "But you could find the inquiry records for the supply column attack, or the lack of them. You could verify whether a diplomatic channel was actually scheduled 4 years ago and what disrupted it. You could find out who ordered the inquiry to be closed and under what authority." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look." The silence stretched between them. And here's the thing about Kaelin Draven that the war records would never capture, and that the court historians on both sides would never write down. He was, underneath the machinery of a man built for violence, a man who had learned very early that the most dangerous thing you could do was stop asking questions. His mother had died because powerful people had arranged a set of circumstances and relied on no one examining them too carefully. He had organized his entire life around answering that death, and now someone was suggesting that his answer had been pointed in a direction someone else had chosen. The specific fury of that recognition is not the fury of a man who has been made a fool of. It's something older and quieter. It's the fury of a man who has given his life to a cause and is now being asked to hold open the possibility that the cause was constructed for him. He did not look like a man working through fury. He looked like a man working through cold, methodical attention, which was more dangerous. "You'll stay in camp," he said, "under protection. You don't leave the perimeter without me or someone I designate." "I'm not a prisoner," Elyra said. "No," he said, "you're not. But your father knows you're here now, which means this camp is the safest place you have access to, and I'd rather not spend resources extracting you from a situation you walked into voluntarily." He held her gaze. "Can you live with that?" She thought about it honestly. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. "Yes," she said. "Then we have an arrangement." He turned toward the camp, stopped, turned back. "The wound. The medic closed it properly." "That's not what I—" He stopped. Something moved through his jaw, the specific tension of a man choosing words with more care than usual. "It needs to be checked again tonight. Field infections move fast." Elyra looked at him. "I'll find the medic." "She comes to you," he said. "I'll tell her." He turned and walked back toward the command post. Elyra stood at the edge of the pines and listened to the wind and thought about a man who had just turned down a war concession and invented a legal clause and was now sending his field medic to check on a wound that was already properly closed. She thought about what it cost to hold two truths at the same time: that someone might have arranged your entire life's purpose without your knowledge, and that the arrangement didn't erase the purpose, only complicated it. That was a particular kind of weight. She knew it from the inside. She thought, he is more complicated than I expected. Then she went back to camp. Basset. The day moved through its military rhythms, assessments, reports, the organized labor of a force that had run an engagement and was now accounting for what it had and hadn't lost. Elyra was given a tent and a change of clothing and left largely to herself, which was not the same as being left unwatched. She could feel the quality of attention on her. Not hostile, not exactly, but present and continuous. The attention of a camp that had been told something about her and was deciding how to metabolize it. By afternoon, word had moved through the camp the way word always moved. Not through formal channels, but through the lateral network of people talking when officers weren't adjacent. She could see it in the way soldiers looked at her when they passed. Not the blank assessment of someone looking at a prisoner. Something more complicated, something that had components she couldn't immediately identify. The field surgeon, the same woman who had closed her jaw that morning, arrived at her tent in the early evening. "Sit," the woman said by way of greeting. Elyra sat. The medic examined the stitches with the same efficient hands, the same focused non-expression. She cleaned the edges and reapplied pressure dressing, and did all of it without commentary. "You're the Voss girl," she said when she was nearly done. "Yes," Elyra said. "Heard your father condemned you this morning. That's accurate." The medic tied off the last piece of dressing and sat back. She looked at Elyra with the direct, calibrated eyes of someone who has seen enough to know the difference between what people say and what they actually mean. "My sister lived in the Halvek corridor," the medic said, "before the war. Good land, decent town." She paused. "Town doesn't exist anymore. Burned in the 3rd year of the engagement. Official account says it was a Draven raid." Elyra was very still. "My sister says she saw the uniforms before it started," the medic said. "Couldn't be sure, too dark, but she says what she saw wasn't Draven black." She packed her kit. "Infections go south fast in cold weather," she said. "Don't touch the stitches." She stood up. "Anything else you need? You tell one of the sentries." She left. Elyra sat in the tent for a long time in the failing light. She thought about a town that didn't exist anymore. She thought about a sister who saw uniforms in the dark and couldn't be sure. She thought about 6 diplomatic openings and 6 disruptions, and a supply column and an inquiry that had been handled. She thought about what it meant if the war was a construction, what it meant that thousands of people were dead inside a structure that had been built to be permanent, not because the hatred between the kingdoms was real, but because the hatred served someone who needed it to go on serving him. She thought about her father's face. She thought, "I have to get to the documents." Not her father's documents. Those were locked inside the Silver Crown Palace in vaults she'd never had access to. But Kaelin had documents. Every military campaign generated records, and those records were the inverse image of the Voss records. They showed what the Draven forces had actually done, which was a kind of negative space in which the shape of what Voss forces had done might be visible. She needed access to the campaign records. She needed Kaelin Draven to give her that access, which meant she needed him to trust her far enough and fast enough that it happened before her father's next move, whatever that was going to be. She was still working through the shape of it when the tent flap opened. Kaelin came in without announcement, which was consistent with what she was learning about how he moved through spaces he controlled, not arrogantly, but without the performance of permission-seeking that would have been a lie. He carried 2 tin cups and a sealed flask that turned out, when he set it down, to contain something that smelled like pine resin and grain alcohol and probably would have cleaned rust off iron. He sat on the ground across from her with the easy physicality of a man who had long since stopped needing chairs to feel settled, and he poured 2 cups without asking, and he set one in front of her. She picked it up. "Your father's response came through unofficial channels," he said. "Not the Herald. A writer to one of the outer sentries, message only, no seal." "What did it say?" "That the decree this morning was the first instrument, that a second is being prepared." He looked at the cup in his hands. It didn't specify the second instrument, which means it was sent specifically to produce uncertainty. "He's good at uncertainty," Elyra said. "He's been running kingdoms on it for 20 years. "What does the second instrument look like if he means business?" "Formal military action," she said. "Not the engagement already running, something separate. A targeted operation with a specific objective." She paused. "Me." Kaelin looked at her. He can't let me exist in enemy territory making claims about the war's origins, she said. Even claims I haven't made publicly yet. Even claims without proof. The possibility that I might make them is enough. He'll want the problem closed. Closed, Kaylin said. That's the word they use, Elyra said, echoing what she'd told him that morning, letting him hear it again in this different context. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face. He'd send a team, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, into active military territory. He's done it before, she said. The supply column attack 4 years ago wasn't the only one. There are at least 2 other incidents I could never get clear information on. Border events that didn't fit the official account of who was where. He has people who operate outside the formal military structure. They're expensive, and they're good, and they don't leave much. Kaylin set down his cup. He looked at his hands for a moment. The specific gesture of a man who is holding something and deciding how hard to hold it. Tell me about your mother, he said. She hadn't expected that. Why? She said. Because you said you inherited her courage, he said, and I want to understand what I'm working with. She looked at him for a long moment. My mother opposed the war, she said, from the beginning. She was in the council meetings. She was the only woman at those tables, and she used that access to argue against every escalation. She said the stated cause of the war didn't justify what the war was going to cost. She paused. She died when I was 4. The official account is illness. And the unofficial account, Kaylin said, is that she was in good health until she wasn't, Elyra said, and that she'd been getting louder in the council in the 6 months before she died, and that my father remarried within the year to a woman who has never once questioned a decision he's made. The tent was quiet. She sounds like someone who should have survived, Kaylin said. Yes, Elyra said. She does. He looked at her with that expression again, the one she still didn't quite have a word for, the one that had been on his face when he first saw her on the field and hadn't fully left since. I'm going to pull the campaign records from the past 4 years, he said, specifically the incident logs for the border corridor. I have records my father's archivist compiled. They're thorough. If there's a pattern of deliberate disruption, it'll show in the gaps and inconsistencies. He held her gaze. I'm not doing this because I trust you. I know, she said. I'm doing it because you gave me a specific claim I can verify, and I don't have the luxury of ignoring specific claims. I understand. If the records show what you say they show, he said, we have a different conversation. And if they don't? He picked up his cup. Then we have that conversation too, he said. Just differently. She drank. The flask's contents were exactly as vicious as they smelled. She kept her face level. Outside the tent, the camp settled into its nighttime rhythms. The changing of sentries, the low conversation of men who had survived an engagement and were processing that survival in the way soldiers did, mostly by not talking about it directly. She thought, tomorrow, the records. Tonight, something else. The massacre, she said. Your mother. Kaylin went still. Not the careful stillness of containment, something different. The stillness of a man who has been carrying a thing for so long that being asked to look at it directly is its own kind of violence. You don't have to, she began. My mother was a diplomat, he said. His voice was flat and careful. The voice of someone who has told a story so many times that the telling has become its own kind of distance. She had been working a back channel with the Voss court for 2 years before the war started. Unofficial, no seals, no formal instruments. She believed there was a way to resolve the territorial dispute without engagement. He paused. She was invited to a meeting inside Voss territory. She went. She didn't come back. The Royal Massacre. That's what the histories call it, he said. It wasn't a massacre, it was 5 people. She went with 4 attendants. They were all killed. He looked at the cup in his hands. The Voss court denied knowledge, said it was a rogue noble faction. There was an inquiry. He stopped. That was handled, Elyra said quietly. He looked up at her. The thing between them in that moment had no clean name. It was not understanding exactly. They were still 2 people from opposite sides of a war that had killed people they both cared about. It was something more specific. The recognition of a shared shape, a parallel construction, 2 people who had been given different versions of a story and had arrived, from different directions, at the same suspicion about the story's author. "If my father arranged your mother's death," Elyra said, "to start a war he needed—" "Don't," Kaelin said. She stopped. "Not yet," he said. His voice was level, but the effort of leveling it was visible. "Let me look at the records first. Let me have something other than possibility." He met her eyes. "I've spent 11 years being certain. I can't afford to replace one certainty with another one before I have ground under it." "That's a reasonable position," she said. "I know it is," he said. "It doesn't make it easier to hold." She understood that. She had spent 19 years holding suspicions that she couldn't convert to certainty, feeling the specific weight of knowing something without having the proof to say you know it. She understood exactly what he was carrying. "I'll help you look," she said. "If you'll let me." He was quiet for a moment. "You'd know what to look for," he said. It wasn't quite agreement, more like thinking aloud. "I know how his official records diverge from what actually happened," she said. "I know the specific kinds of gaps he leaves when he's had something removed. I know his patterns." She paused. "I've been reading around them for 3 years. Kaelin looked at her for a long time. Then he stood, taking the flask. He moved toward the tent flap, and she thought the conversation was finished. He stopped without turning around. "First light," he said. "The records are in the command tent. We start before the morning briefing." He left. Elyra sat in the dark tent and listened to the camp and thought about first light and records and the specific shape of a conspiracy that had swallowed 2 kingdoms for 11 years. And she thought about a man who had just agreed to look at the possibility that his entire life had been pointed in a direction someone else had chosen. She thought, he's braver than he knows. Or he already knows and does it anyway. She wasn't sure yet which one it was. She was still working on it when a sentry came to her tent. He was young, maybe 20, and he had the expression of a man delivering a message he hadn't been told the meaning of. "My lady," he said, "a rider came in from the eastern perimeter. Not the herald. Different markings. Not Voss military." He paused. "He's asking for you specifically. Says he has a message from inside the Silver Crown Palace." Elyra went very still. "From whom?" she said. "Wouldn't say," the sentry said. "Just said to tell you the word is Halvex Crossing. 3rd stall from the left." Cass. The old man who had packed her bundle and told her about the remount post and said don't without looking up from his work. The old man who had been in that stable since before she was born and who knew more about the palace's interior workings than most of the people who lived inside it. Cass had sent a rider, which meant something had happened inside the Silver Crown Palace serious enough that a stable master of 22 years had broken cover to warn her. She stood up. "Take me to the rider," she said, "and get Prince Kaelin." The sentry blinked. "My lady, it's nearly—" "Now," Elyra said. He moved. She followed him through the camp in the dark, and she thought about what could have happened inside the palace that would make Cass send a rider in the night. And the possibilities that assembled themselves in her mind were not small ones. She was still sorting through them when she saw the rider, a young man, travel-worn, with the specific look of someone who has covered a lot of ground fast and hasn't slept. He was standing near the eastern perimeter with 2 Draven sentries who were watching him with the careful attention of people who hadn't decided yet what he was. He saw her and something loosened in his posture. "Lady Voss," he said, "Cass said you'd know what the message means." "What is it?" she said. "He said to tell you the king sent riders north this morning," the rider said. "Not messengers, soldiers, 6 of them. Light armor, no markings." He paused. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who has been carrying bad news long enough to develop a complicated relationship with it. He said they weren't riding toward the front. The eastern perimeter, north. She stood in the dark and felt the specific cold of a calculation completing. "They're coming here," she said. Not a question. "Cass said they left at dawn," the rider said. That's 12 hours, she said. "Give or take." She turned. Kaelin was already there. He had come from the direction of the command tent, moving with the particular efficiency of a man who has learned to respond to urgency without performing urgency. He had heard enough. Their eyes met. And in that moment, with 12 hours on the clock and 6 unmarked soldiers moving through the dark somewhere to the north, and the campaign records unread in the command tent, and the name Halvik Crossing hanging in the cold air between them like the specific shape of a truth that was about to become unavoidable. "We look at the records now," Kaelin said. "Tonight." "Yes," Elyra said, and they moved. The command tent smelled of tallow and old paper, and the specific cold that comes through canvas when the temperature outside is dropping and you haven't had time to build a proper fire. Kaelin moved to the record chests along the back wall without lighting more than 2 lamps. Enough to read by, not enough to make the tent visible at distance from outside the perimeter. Elyra registered this without comment. He was thinking about the 6 riders moving through the dark somewhere to the north and adjusting accordingly. She would have done the same. The records were organized by campaign season, each bundle wrapped in oilskin with a date stamp burned into the leather. 4 years was 4 bundles. Incident reports, supply logs, command correspondence, casualty accounting, and the category of document that military forces generated when something happened that didn't fit cleanly into any of the other categories. It was this last category that mattered. Kaelin set the 4 bundles on the field table. He found the incident log sections and placed them in front of her without speaking. She pulled the lamp closer and started reading. This is what uncovering truth actually looks like. Not revelation, not confrontation, not the dramatic moment of a single damning document. It looks like 2 people bent over papers in a cold tent at midnight, reading systematically through events that each seemed individually to have a clean explanation, looking for the shape that only becomes visible when you lay them next to each other and step back far enough to see the whole. She read the way she had always read documents she wasn't supposed to have access to. Fast, retaining, flagging friction points without stopping to analyze them. The analysis came after. The reading was pure intake. Kaelin worked the second bundle from the other side of the table. He didn't narrate what he was finding. He was doing the same thing, building the picture before talking about what was in it. The first hour passed in near silence. The second hour, she found it. Not one thing. A cluster. 3 incident logs, 3 different campaign seasons, each individually minor enough to be dismissed as miscommunication or battlefield chaos. Together, they formed something else entirely. "Here," she said. Kaelin came around the table and stood beside her. She showed him the 3 entries. The first, 3 years ago, a Draven border patrol had reported a column of unidentified riders moving south along the ridgeline above the Halvik corridor. No markings. The patrol logged it as a possible Voss military movement and filed it as unresolved. The second, 2 years ago, a Draven supply depot in the eastern sector had been raided from the north. Every Voss military presence in that sector was to the west. North was uncontrolled territory. The Draven investigation had attributed the raid to Voss irregular forces exploiting the uncontrolled corridor. The inquiry closed without identifying the specific unit responsible. The third, 14 months ago, a Draven diplomatic courier carrying preliminary back-channel communication had been intercepted, attributed to Voss intelligence operations. The diplomatic attempt had been abandoned. The courier had not been recovered. 3 incidents, Kaelin said. 3 attributed to Voss. 3 that don't fit Voss operational patterns. The ridgeline, Elyra said. The Halvik corridor sits above the trade road connecting to the Silver Crown's northern supply route. Nobody on legitimate Voss military business would be there. It's the wrong side of the terrain for any standard operation. She paused. It's the right side for a team that doesn't want to appear in Voss military records. The depot raid from the north, Kaelin said, getting there himself. My father's irregular operatives use northern approach routes specifically because those routes don't appear in standard military logs. Not military. Not supposed to be anywhere near the front, but if you needed something to look like a Voss military action without being traceable through Voss military records, you'd use the people who operate outside those records, he said. His voice had gone flat. And the courier, she said. Every time a diplomatic opening was close to becoming real, something happened to close it. 3 of those closings have operational signatures that don't match standard Voss military doctrine. She looked at him. That's not coincidence. Coincidence doesn't have a signature. Kaelin stepped back from the table. He moved to the tent entrance and back. Not pacing, more like he needed to put distance between himself and the documents, and then close it again. She watched him and thought about what it cost to discover that the organizing principle of your life might have been manufactured for you. There's more, she said. She didn't say it gently. There was no way to be gentle with this. The massacre. He stopped moving. The back channel your mother was working, Elyra said. 2 years of unofficial contact. If she was close to something real, a path toward resolving the dispute without engagement, then someone who needed the dispute to remain unresolved would have needed to stop her. I know what you're saying, he said. I know you do, she said. I'm saying it out loud anyway because it needs to be. He looked at her from across the tent. His face had gone to controlled stone. The inquiry into her death was run by my father's counsel, he said. 3 senior advisors and the military intelligence chief. A pause. Who is still serving? Bryn, Elyra said, giving him the name she'd heard him use. He looked at her sharply. He's been here since the engagement started, Kaelin said. Slowly. Like thinking aloud, like he was watching something assemble in real time and wasn't sure yet what it was. He manages all communications. Every diplomatic contact goes through his office. He stopped. The courier who was intercepted 14 months ago. She didn't say it. She watched him get there himself. He got there. The specific anguish of that recognition is not the fury of a man who has been made a fool of. It's something older and quieter. It's the fury of a man who has given his life to a cause and is now being asked to hold open the possibility that the cause was constructed for him, pointed, aimed, handed to him by someone who needed him walking in that direction and had arranged the world to make sure he kept walking. The original inquiry files, Elyra said. The evidence logs from the massacre. If the weapons were planted, there will be something wrong with the provenance documentation. There always is. You can't fabricate a complete evidence chain without leaving the seam somewhere. Kaelin moved to the back of the tent and pulled a separate chest. Smaller, different lock. He opened it with a key from his belt and set it on the table. She opened it. The inquiry records were at the bottom, wrapped separately, with a seal she recognized immediately. Not a Draven seal. Her mother's personal seal. She went very still. That seal, Kaelin said. My mother used it for correspondence she didn't want going through official channels. She was already breaking the wax carefully. How does a document with my mother's seal end up in your father's inquiry archive? The document was a letter, handwritten, in a script she recognized from the 3 documents of her mother's she had ever been able to access. The same tight, precise hand. She read it again. The cold in the tent went from ambient to internal. She was writing to your mother, Elyra said. Her voice came out level because she made it that way, by force. This is a response to your mother's contact. 2 women, working toward the same thing from opposite sides of the line. She set it on the table between them. He read it. The letter was brief. It said the contact had been received. It said the writer agreed that the territorial dispute could be resolved without engagement if the right parties were in communication. It said there were obstacles on the Voss side she was working to address. It said she was hopeful. It was dated 3 months before his mother died. Both women had been working to stop the war. Both women were dead. The war had started immediately after. Kaelin stood at the table and read the letter twice and didn't move. She watched the absolute stillness of a man who has just watched the story of his entire life collapse and is making the decision about what to do in the space where the story used to be. Both of them, he said. Yes. Both trying to stop it. Yes. And both dead. Yes. He straightened. He looked at her with eyes that had gone very dark, very quiet. The specific quality of someone who has moved past the stage of feeling and into the stage of deciding. It was not detachment. It was the opposite of detachment. It was a man pressing the full weight of what he felt down into his feet and using it as ground to stand on. The evidence logs, she said. They went through the original inquiry files together. She found the seam in 20 minutes, a provenance entry for the weapons that listed a supply depot as the point of origin. The depot number was real. The date on the transfer record was 3 weeks before the massacre, but the depot in question had been decommissioned 4 months before the transfer record's date. A decommissioned depot could not have issued a transfer record. Someone had used a real depot number without knowing it had been closed. The weapons had been planted. The inquiry that built the case for war had been built on planted evidence. Kaelin looked at the provenance entry for a long time without speaking. I need to see his files, she said. Bryn's personal correspondence. If he's been managing diplomatic communications, His files will show what actually went through his office versus what he reported. She paused. I need an hour in his records. Kalen looked at her. She watched him process what she was asking. Authorization to surveil his own intelligence chief, a man he had sat beside for 11 years, entrusted with the operational foundations of everything he'd built. His tent is in the command quarter, Kalen said finally. Northwest corner, personal files in an iron box under his field desk. A pause. The camp changes sentries at the second bell, 3-minute window between rotations where the command quarter has no dedicated sentry. He met her eyes. Take Marin, the medic. She moves quiet and has access to that quarter that doesn't raise questions. You knew she was already in this, Elyra said. I noticed, he said. What she said to you this evening. Her sister's town burned in the 3rd year of the engagement. I've known that for 4 years. Something moved through his expression. Maybe now I have something worth the risk of asking her. Okao. The second bell. The sentries rotated. The 3-minute window opened. Marin moved through the camp with the authority of a woman who had legitimate reasons to be everywhere. She carried a lamp turned low and a set of keys for the medical supply stores. And she didn't perform stealth because performed stealth looked like exactly what it was. She simply moved like a woman doing her job at an odd hour, which was a thing field medics did regularly and nobody questioned. Bryn's tent. Elyra slipped through the entrance gap. The intelligence chief slept on a cot in the far corner. His breathing was regular, deep. She moved to the field desk and found the iron box exactly where Kalen had said it would be. Unlocked. Confidence, she thought. A man who has operated unchallenged for 11 years doesn't lock his private files because nobody has ever looked. She opened it. The correspondence files were organized by date. She went through the section covering the past 4 years with the focused efficiency of someone who reads documents in bad light and limited time as a matter of survival. She wasn't looking for confession. She was looking for seams, things that didn't match the official record, absences where presence should have been. The first one was in the records from 4 years ago, the diplomatic channel that had been abandoned after the courier interception. In the official report, Bryn's office had documented a confident attribution to Voss intelligence forces, complete with supporting signals documentation. In his private correspondence, there was a letter to an unnamed recipient dated 2 days before the interception. The letter did not describe an interception. It described a plan. She read it twice to be certain. Then she kept going. 4 more in the next 20 minutes, each a fragment, nothing that was, by itself, proof of everything. A letter arranging a meeting with a party identified only by an initial, correspondence discussing a column moving through a northern approach route, a note about a set of weapons to be delivered to a specific location and what was to be done with them afterward. Weapons. A specific location. What was to be done with them? She was holding a document that described the delivery of the weapons found at the massacre site that had killed Kalen's mother. Her hands were not shaking. She made that choice, to hold this and keep moving, with the specific cold deliberateness of someone who has passed through shock and arrived at forward motion. There would be time to feel this later. Right now, the feeling would be a liability. She memorized the letter, the exact words, the date, the abbreviated name at the top. The initial was V, General Vane, her father's senior commander, the man who controlled the irregular forces that didn't appear in standard military records. The man who had, according to the writer Cass sent, authorized the 6 unmarked riders now moving through the dark somewhere to the north. And according to the writer, Vane himself was a day behind them. Her father hadn't just sent 6 riders for her. He'd sent 6 riders with his senior operational commander positioned 1 day behind them in case 6 wasn't enough. She put the documents back exactly as she'd found them, closed the box, moved to the entrance, made it back to the command tent with 4 minutes to spare. Kalen read her face when she came through and stopped asking whatever he'd been about to ask. She laid it out flat. The letters, the fragments, the weapons delivery note, the initial. She told him about Vane. She watched him understand what the initial meant and what Vane's positioning meant. He stood with his hands at his sides and his face doing the thing it did when he was managing something through physical containment, and this time it was not working as cleanly as it usually did. She could see the thing underneath, the sheer pressure of a man who has just had the central fact of his life confirmed as a manufactured lie, built by someone he'd trusted, Someone who had sat beside him for 11 years and handed him the evidence that built the lie, and watched him walk in the direction it pointed. "We can't move on him in camp," she said before he could speak. "He'll have contingencies. A man like this has always planned for discovery. If we confront him here, he runs or he burns everything, and we lose control of what happens next." She held his gaze. "We let him think nothing has changed. 24 hours. We use the time." "Can I sit across from the man who arranged my mother's death?" he said, very quietly, "and let him think I don't know?" "Yes," she said, "because the alternative is that he runs, your father's official account survives, and everything we have is fragments that disappear the moment someone with authority decides to make them disappear." A long silence. "Yes," Kaylin said, "I can do it." She believed him without question. This is the specific quality of a person built for endurance. You can ask them to carry things that would break other people, and they carry them, and they do not break. They are changed by the carrying, but they do not break. He picked up the letter with her mother's seal and looked at it for a moment. The handwriting of a woman who had died trying to stop a war, the correspondence that had survived in an archive designed to confirm the war's necessity. He folded it carefully and put it inside his armor, against his chest. "Get some sleep," he said. "We have 24 hours. He moved toward the tent entrance, stopped without turning. "Your mother died trying to stop it," he said. "Yes," Elyra said. "Mine too." He left. She stood in the empty tent with the dying lamp and thought about two women who had found each other across enemy lines and tried to build something and been killed for it. She thought about what their daughters were going to do with the inheritance they'd been left. Not the grief, not the absence, the unfinished work. She was still holding that thought when the tent flap opened. It was not Kaylin. Bryn was fully dressed, not the rumpled alertness of a man woken suddenly, but the complete, careful presentation of a man who had been awake for some time and had chosen this moment deliberately. He was in his middle 50s, gray-haired, with the quiet face of someone who had learned long ago that the most dangerous-looking men were rarely the most effective ones in a room. He looked at the table, the open record chests, the lamp. Then he looked at her. "Lady Voss," he said, politely. "The way you speak to someone you have completely surrounded." She understood in that instant, the crystalline clarity of a trap she had walked into without seeing, that he had been awake the entire time, had heard her in his tent, had lain still and let her take what she took, and then done his own calculation and arrived here, in this configuration, at a moment of his choosing. And Kaylin was not here. She stood at the table with the evidence of his conspiracy laid out in front of her, and nothing between her and the entrance but him. This is the moment that philosophy talks about, but rarely captures honestly. The moment when survival requires you to become something you have not been yet. Not a better version of what you were. Something structurally different. Something that hasn't existed in you before this exact instant, because the pressure required to form it has never existed before either. Elyra had been invisible for 19 years. She had been careful and patient and strategic and small, because small was what survived in rooms designed to crush her. She had learned to read power and move around it and use its blind spots. She could not be small right now. She met his eyes, and she did not step back. "Bryn," she said, like she'd expected him. Something shifted in his expression, just barely. "You read my files," he said. "I did," she said. "Then you understand your position," he said. "Or you understand yours," she said. He looked at her with the patient calm of a man who has handled difficult situations for 30 years and does not consider a 19-year-old girl to be the most difficult one he's faced. "Your father wants you returned," he said. Quietly, without complication. "I can arrange that. The alternative is considerably less comfortable for everyone." He paused. "The choice is still partially yours." She looked at him. She thought about her mother, who had tried to stop this quietly and had died for it. She thought about Kaylin's mother, who had done the same. She thought about the 40 days her father had offered for her return, the arithmetic of a trade, the precise value assigned to her life by the man who had made it. She thought about what it meant to step completely out of the shape that had been made for you and into the one you were going to have to construct yourself, right now, with no blueprint and no time. "No," she said. He blinked, just once. "No," she said again. The choice stopped being partially mine the moment you walked in here instead of raising the alarm. You came to manage me yourself quietly before Kalen knows you're in this tent, which means you're more afraid of what I've already told him than you're showing. And a man who runs the intelligence apparatus of this campaign does not get personally afraid of a 19-year-old girl unless she's already done damage he can't easily contain. Something moved through his face. The first real thing she'd seen there. "You're smarter than they said," he said. "They didn't know me," she said. "Nobody did." She held his gaze. "Get out of this tent." He was still for a moment. "Lady Voss, get out," she said, "or stand there while I start shouting for the sentries. Either way, the quiet management you came here for is over." A silence so complete she could hear the lamp burning. Then Bryn smiled. Small, without warmth. The smile of a man who has just been forced to adjust his timeline and is already doing it. "Your mother made the same mistake," he said quietly. "She thought courage was enough." He turned and walked out. She stood in the empty tent for exactly 1 second. Then she opened her mouth and shouted Kalen's name into the night loud enough to shake the canvas walls. Not from fear, not from panic, but from the cold, clear understanding that the 24 hours they had been counting on had just become something far less, that Bryn was already moving toward his contingencies, that the careful patience she had been maintaining was now the one thing she could no longer afford. The unfinished work had just found its deadline, and she had just become the woman who was going to finish it. Kalen came through the tent entrance 30 seconds after she shouted, sword already drawn, moving with the complete physical alertness of a man who had not been sleeping and had been waiting for exactly this kind of sound. He read the tent in one sweep. The open chests, the lamp, her standing at the table, Bryn absent. "Where?" he said. "He was just here," she said. "He knew. He was awake the whole time. He let me take the files and then he came here himself." She met his eyes. "He's moving, right now." Kalen was already turning back to the entrance. "His contingency is the documents," she said, moving with him. "He'll burn his files first. Everything we didn't take tonight." "I know," Kalen said. They came through the entrance into the cold dark of the camp, and Kalen raised his voice once, sharp, carrying, the specific register of a command that expects immediate compliance and gets it. 2 sentries materialized from the shadows within seconds. "Command quarter, northwest tent," Kalen said. "Nobody leaves. Nobody enters. Move." They moved. He didn't wait to watch them go. He was already crossing the camp toward the command quarter, and Elyra matched his pace. And the camp around them was beginning to feel the change in the air the way camps do. That particular shift in the quality of nighttime quiet that precedes organized alarm. The sound of men who are trained to respond to urgency starting to come awake. They reached Bryn's tent 2 steps ahead of the sentries who had preceded them, and Kalen went through the entrance without slowing, and the tent was empty. Not fled. The iron box was open on the field desk, half the contents scattered, as if someone had sorted through in a hurry and taken specific things. The lamp inside was still warm. He hadn't been gone more than 4 minutes. "He has a route out," Kalen said. "Flat, certain. He's had one planned. Every man like him has one planned." He turned back to the entrance and raised his voice again, this time louder, carrying across the command quarter to the sentries beginning to appear at tent openings. "Full perimeter lockdown. Nobody exits this camp without my direct authorization. Pass it to every gate." He paused half a breath. "And find Sergeant Diel. Now." This is what command looks like when it's real rather than performed. Not the display of authority, not the theater of leadership, but the specific, rapid conversion of a situation's demands into action, with no wasted motion and no visible hesitation. Kalen Draven had spent 11 years building a war machine, and he knew every part of it, and he used that knowledge now with the efficiency of a man who has been handed a crisis and accepted it without argument. Elyra moved to the scattered documents on the field desk. She went through what remained in under 2 minutes. He had taken the weapons correspondence, the letter with the initial V, the most damning material. He had left the organizational records, supply logs, communications registries, the structural documentation of his work that looked innocuous without the correspondence to illuminate what it meant. "He took the proof," she said, "left the framework." "Can we reconstruct it?" Kalen said. With what's in your inquiry archive, she said, the provenance entry for the weapons, my mother's letter, the incident logs. She looked at him. It's not the same as what he took, but it's enough to make the case if we have someone willing to hear it. Who? He said. The Draven Court, she said, your father's counsel. Not because they'll be sympathetic, I don't know whether they will be, but because they're the body with the authority to act on what we know, and because if we bring this to them before Bryn does, we control the shape of what they hear. Kaelin looked at her for a moment. Bryn goes to Vayne, he said. That's his exit. Vayne is a day out. He'll ride hard and reach him before morning if he left now. Then we have until morning, she said. A soldier appeared in the entrance. Sergeant Dael, stocky and sleep-roughened, but moving with the focused attention of a man who had been doing this long enough that being woken for an emergency was just part of the job. Sergeant, Kaelin said, we have a man leaving camp under unauthorized circumstances. Bryn, the intelligence chief. I need him found and held, alive and unharmed. You understand me on the unharmed. Yes, my lord. Heading? East, Elyra said. Both men looked at her. The eastern perimeter is the closest point to the Voss position. If he's going to Vayne, east is the fastest route. She paused. He'll want a horse. Check if any are missing from the eastern stable first. Dale looked at Kaelin. Kaelin nodded once. Dale left at a run. The camp was fully awake now, the organized, purposeful wakefulness of a military unit responding to command rather than the chaotic alarm of surprise. Kaelin had structured it right. The difference mattered. Chaos produced casualties and mistakes and opportunities for the wrong people. Organized response produced outcomes you could direct. He turned back to her. If he reaches Vayne, he said. Vayne moves immediately, she said. He won't wait. He'll know the window is closing and he'll push the 6 riders ahead and follow with whatever force he has. She met Kaelin's eyes. How many men does Vayne have? Our intelligence on his position says 40, Kaelin said. Light cavalry, mobile. 40 plus the 6 already moving, she said, against your current camp strength.
Too much, it's
212 after this morning's engagement casualties, he said. But Vayne's 40 aren't coming for the camp. He held her gaze. They're coming for you. She knew he was right. 40 light cavalry against a fortified camp position was a losing proposition, and Vayne was not a man who ran losing operations. He would use the 6 riders as distraction and come at a specific point with a specific objective. Extract Elyra, neutralize the evidence, leave. Targeted operations were what her father's apparatus did. Then we don't let him get close enough to run a targeted operation, she said. We meet him on open ground, on our terms, before he reaches the camp perimeter. You're describing an offensive engagement, Kaelin said. I'm describing the only position that gives us control of the ground, she said. He looked at her. She could see him running the tactical calculation, the variables, the terrain, the risks, the alternative of sitting behind the camp perimeter and defending against a force designed specifically to punch through camp defenses at a precise point. The field east of camp, he said finally, half a mile out. It's open ground with the ridgeline on the north face. Puts anyone coming from the east into a funnel if we're positioned correctly. Yes, she said. We leave a skeleton crew on the perimeter, he said. Everyone else moves east before first light. He was already moving toward the entrance. Get the letters. Everything from the inquiry archive. You carry them on your person. Not in a pack, not in a saddlebag. On your body. If anything happens to me, you ride north to the Draven Court. You take the evidence and you go directly to my father's senior council member. His name is Lord Eravik. He hated Bryn from the beginning. He'll listen. Nothing's going to happen to you, she said. He looked at her over his shoulder. Carry the letters anyway, he said. She carried them. She put her mother's letter and the provenance entry and the incident logs inside her armor, against her skin, the same place he had put her mother's correspondence when he took it from the table. Against the skin, where you kept the things that mattered enough to protect with your body. The hour before first light had a quality that was different from the rest of the night. A specific density, a weight to the darkness that felt like the world gathering itself before the demand of morning. The camp moved in that density with quiet efficiency, 200 men preparing to put themselves between an incoming threat and the ground they were holding, doing it without drama, because drama was a luxury that soldiers in the field couldn't afford. Elyra saddled Ash herself. The gray destrier was bad-tempered about being woken and communicated this by trying to bite her shoulder while she tightened the girth, which she deflected without ceremony and finished the job. She had the sword she'd been carrying since the conscript column, and a long knife from the medical stores that Marin had pressed into her hands, without comment when she passed through the medical quarter. Marin was standing outside her tent with her own kit packed when Elyra came through. "I go where the wounded are," the medic said, preempting the question. "The ridge line," Elyra said. "North face. It'll be protected." "I know where the protected positions are," Marin said, with the dry patience of a woman who had survived more engagements than most of the soldiers in the camp. "Go do what you're doing." Elyra went. She found Kaelin at the eastern edge of camp, mounted, talking to Dael and two other officers in the low, rapid shorthand of men who had worked together long enough to drop everything that wasn't information. She pulled Ash up beside them and listened. Dael had found a horse missing from the eastern stable, a fast one, which meant Bryn had either known which horses were fast, which was possible, or he'd had someone in the stable who knew, which was worse. "He's got an hour on us at least," Dael said. "Maybe more." "He'll make for the Voss forward post," Kaelin said. 7 miles east. Vane's position is another 15 beyond that." He looked at the eastern dark. Even at hard pace, he can't reach Vane and have Vane moving before first light, Elyra said, which is when Vane was already planning to move. The 6 riders were advanced. Vane was always going to follow at dawn regardless of whether Bryn reached him. A short silence. "So Bryn reaching Vane doesn't change Vane's timing," Kaelin said. "It changes his information," she said. "He'll know the evidence exists. He'll know what we have. He'll push harder and faster because he needs to neutralize us before we can move the evidence out of reach." She paused. "Which means he won't send 40. He'll come with everything he has, and he won't wait for the 6 riders to prepare the ground first." Kaelin looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to Dael. "Change of deployment. We go further east. Full mile out, not half. I want the ridge in our left flank and the creek bed in our right before we set the line." Dael nodded and moved. They rode out in the gray pre-dawn. 212 soldiers moving east through cold air that smelled of pine and coming weather. The kind of weather that came off the mountains and hit the corridor land fast and hit hard. Elyra rode at Kaelin's left and thought about the letters against her chest and about the shape of the day that was coming. There is a particular quality to the period before a fight that most people who haven't lived inside it cannot accurately imagine. It is not fear exactly. Fear is too active a word for what it is. It is more like the body making a series of preparations that the conscious mind can observe but not direct, the heart rate settling into something steadier rather than faster, the peripheral vision opening. The weight of the sword becoming something you stop noticing because it's been integrated into the physical sense of where your body ends. She had felt this before, on the field during the engagement that had started all of this. She recognized it now, and she did not fight it. You didn't fight the body preparing itself. You let it, and you pointed the preparation in the right direction. They reached the position Kaelin had called, the creek bed on the right, the ridge running along the left flank, a quarter-mile of open ground ahead. The light was beginning now, the specific gray-blue of dawn that made shapes visible before it made them readable. The soldiers deployed with the practiced quiet of people who had done this enough times that the doing was mostly automatic. Elyra stayed mounted near the center of the line, beside Kaelin. She looked east into the brightening dark. "If this works," she said. "When it works," he said. "When it works," she said, "and we get the evidence to your father's council. What happens after that?" He was quiet for a moment. "The war loses its justification," he said, "on both sides. The official account of the founding incident collapses. Bryn's involvement implicates your father directly." He paused. "Both kingdoms have to reckon with having fought 11 years for a manufactured reason." "That's not the same as stopping," she said. "No," he agreed. "Wars don't stop because their reasons turn out to be false. People are still dead. Territory is still contested. Hatreds are still real, even if the original cause wasn't." He looked at her. "But the people who needed it to continue for their own reasons lose the cover of legitimacy. And without that cover, they're just men holding power by force," she said. "Which is a much harder position to hold," he said. She thought about her father, the specific image of his face that came when she thought about him. Not the public face, the ceremonial face that the court saw, but the private one, the face he wore in small rooms when he thought he'd won. She had seen that face a handful of times. She knew its shape. She thought about what it would look like when it was wrong. A sound from the east. Faint, then less faint. The specific percussion of multiple horses moving at speed. The sound carrying through the cold morning air with the clarity that cold gave to everything. "Contact," said the soldier on her right. Not loudly, just the word, the established signal. Kalen raised his hand. The line went to full alert. The quiet, dense readiness of 200 people shifting from waiting into the specific forward attention of people who can hear what's coming and have chosen to meet it. The shapes emerged from the eastern dark at the edges of visibility first. Darker shapes against the dark, moving fast. The loosely spread formation of cavalry that has been pushed hard through the night and is coming in with the urgency of a force that knows it's behind its own timeline. More than 40. Elyra counted the shapes as they resolved. 60, 70. The number kept building. "He didn't send everything he had," Kalen said beside her. He sounded neither surprised nor not surprised. The flat tone of a man integrating a changed variable. "He sent more." "Bryn told him about the evidence," she said. "He came with everything." 80, at least, said Dial from Kalen's right. 80 light cavalry against 212 infantry, with a creek on one side and a ridge on the other. The math was not comfortable, but it was not impossible. Infantry in a good defensive position against cavalry in a funnel. The geometry favored the defenders if the line held. If the line held. "The 6 riders," Elyra said. "They were supposed to come from the north. Where are they?" A half-beat of silence. Then Kalen turned to the ridge line. The 6 riders came off the ridge at a gallop, from above and behind the Draven left flank, hitting the upper end of the line at the exact moment that Vane's main force crossed into effective engagement range from the east. Coordinated. The 6 riders hadn't been a vanguard. They'd been the pincer. The Draven left flank buckled under the ridge attack. Not broke, but compressed. The soldiers there turning to meet the downhill charge and losing their position along the creek side of the line. The shape of the engagement changed in the first 30 seconds from a defensive funnel into something messier, the geometry that had favored the defenders suddenly complicated by the second point of pressure. Kalen was moving before she'd finished processing it, turning his horse, shouting the repositioning command, his voice cutting through the noise with the specific authority of someone who has run enough of these to know that the first 30 seconds of a position change determine the next 3 hours. She moved with him because moving was the only option. Ash responded to her leg pressure with the grudging competence of a horse who was bad-tempered but well-trained, and she pushed him toward the compressed left flank because that was where the line needed weight, and she had a sword and she knew how to use it. The engagement swallowed her. This is the reality that nobody who hasn't been inside it understands about large-scale violence. It is not the choreographed thing that memory and story make it afterward. It is immediacy and noise and the total collapse of anything beyond the next 3 seconds. The body operating on the preparation it has been given, and the mind running about 2 seconds behind, processing inputs and generating responses with the specific economy of a system under extreme load. She fought. She didn't count the time. She registered specific things. A Voss cavalry rider coming in from her left that Ash shouldered away with the heavy competence of a horse who had done this before. The weight and resistance of her sword against a blade that deflected rather than struck clean. The cold air burning in her lungs when she breathed hard. The way her jaw ached from the stitches when she took a jarring impact to her shoulder. She registered somewhere in the controlled chaos that Kalen was fighting 20 feet to her right, and that he fought the way the soldiers had described around the fire, like he was running towards something and pain was not loud enough to get his attention. She understood it now from the inside. He was not indifferent to pain. He was running towards something, and the pain simply could not compete with the direction he was moving. The left flank held. Barely. Then less barely. Then it held cleanly as the repositioned soldiers found the new line and set it. The 6 ridge riders were contained within the first 4 minutes, overwhelmed by the weight of the reformed flank and the specific disadvantage of horses on ground that had become too tight for cavalry to maneuver. 3 of the 6 went down. The other 3 pulled back up the ridge. The main force from the east was a different problem. Vane was not a general who wasted force. He had brought 80, and he was using them with the efficient brutality of a man who had spent 30 years learning how. The Eastern engagement ground forward without the clean break that would have ended it quickly. A sustained, expensive push, the kind that cost on both sides in direct proportion to how long it ran. It ran a long time. There is a point in a sustained engagement when the question shifts from who wins to who lasts. It's not a moment. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives gradually as the first clarity of action gives way to the weight of endurance, the specific challenge of continuing to function when the body is using resources it doesn't have because the situation hasn't finished demanding them. The soldiers who are still standing at that point are the ones who made the decision before the fight started that they were going to last, not because they were certain they would, but because they had decided that the alternative was not available to them. Elyra made that decision without thinking about it. She had made it in the servants' corridor, and she had made it on the road east, and she had made it in a dozen smaller ways across the past week. It was not a new decision. It was the same decision, recurring, saying the same thing each time it was asked. Not yet. Not here. Not this. She was fighting near the eastern line when she heard Kaelin's voice change. Not louder. She had noticed that he was never louder under pressure, that his volume actually decreased as the situation intensified, his voice becoming more concentrated rather than more projected. But the quality shifted. She had learned his voice well enough in the past 48 hours to know the difference between command tone and the specific, compressed intensity of someone who has just seen something that reorganized the situation. She pulled Ash around and looked. Vane. She recognized him from palace occasions. A compact, gray man in his 60s with the efficient physicality of someone who had never let his body get ahead of his usefulness. He had broken through the eastern line at a specific point, a concentrated push with a small wedge of his best riders, and he was moving directly toward the center position where the Draven command structure was concentrated. Moving toward Kaelin. This was not tactical. This was personal. The decision to take out the command and collapse the line from the center, yes, that was tactical. But the way Vane was moving had a quality that was not purely operational. He was moving with the specific urgency of a man who has more at stake than the outcome of a field engagement. He was moving toward Kaelin because Kaelin had the evidence, because Kaelin, alive with the inquiry documents and her mother's letter and the provenance records, was a problem that couldn't be managed by 40 cavalry on an open field. Elyra pushed Ash forward, not toward Vane, toward Kaelin, arriving at his left side 3 seconds before Vane's wedge hit the center position, and what happened in the next 30 seconds was the kind of thing that happens when a situation stops being a calculation and becomes a series of instants, each one complete and demanding, with no space between them for anything except the response the body has been prepared to give. She took the rider on Vane's left because he was the one angled toward Kaelin's unprotected side, and he was the one who was going to get there first if she didn't. Ash hit the other horse at a shoulder angle that neither horse had chosen, but both absorbed, and she was already moving her blade before the impact resolved, and the rider went down. And she came around and there was another one, and she dealt with that one too, and the 30 seconds ended, and she was still on the horse and Kaelin was still on his horse, and Vane had been pushed back from the center line by the specific chaos that a two-sided counter-pressure created. She was bleeding from somewhere. She registered this without urgency. The warm tracking of blood from a point on her left forearm where something had gotten through. Not deep. Functional. Kaelin looked at her. "Stay close," he said. "I am close," she said. Something moved through his face. Then Vane reformed his wedge and came again, and there was no more space for anything except the next 3 seconds, and then the 3 after that. The engagement broke at what she later estimated was mid-morning, though she had no reliable access to time during it. It broke, not at a single decisive moment, but through accumulated pressure. The Voss cavalry losing cohesion as the eastern line stopped bending and started pushing back. The Ridge Riders gone or retreated, Vane's concentrated center push absorbed and contained. The overall shape of the Voss force changing from aggressive to survival-oriented. They didn't run. She gave them that. They withdrew in order, backing east with the specific discipline of soldiers who have been told that retreat is a tactical option and have believed it. But they withdrew. The field went quiet with the specific quality of silence that follows sustained violence, present, careful, full of the sounds of men who are hurt and men who are still checking whether they are. Elyra became aware of the state of her body in stages: the arm, the ribs on the right side, which had been complaining for an hour, and were now insisting on being heard; the jaw, which had reopened somewhere in the fighting and was doing the warm, dull work of something that needs to be closed again. Ash was blowing hard beneath her, but standing solid, which was the most important thing. She looked for Kalen. He was 20 feet away, dismounted, talking to Dael with the focused intensity of a man running a post-engagement accounting. She could see from here that he was favoring his right side, a different quality of stillness on that side, the way people hold an injured place without acknowledging it. She pushed Ash toward him and dismounted and went to stand beside him. Dael was reporting casualties. She listened and she watched Kalen listen, and she thought about the weight of that listening. Every number a name, every name a person who had been standing this morning and was not standing now. The weight of command at its most specific and unavoidable. When Dael finished, Kalen was quiet for a moment. "Get Marin to the field," he said. "Full medical deployment. Nobody waits." Dael moved. Kalen turned to her. He looked at her arm first, the specific, assessing quality of someone checking the state of a person they are responsible for and have just watched fight through half a morning. "It's not deep," she said. "I know," he said. "I can see that from here." He looked at her with the expression that she had been assembling a vocabulary for over the past 2 days. The one that had been on his face since the field and hadn't fully left. The one that was made of things she hadn't finished naming. She looked back at him and she thought, this is what it means to have fought alongside someone. Not the romance of it, not the abstract concept of shared danger. The specific, grounded reality of knowing exactly what a person is under pressure, because you have been under pressure beside them and watched them make every decision in real time. She knew what he was under pressure. He knew what she was. There was no more mystery in it. Only weight. Only the specific weight of two people who have been through something together that changes the before and after. "Vane," she said. "He got out," Kalen said. "I know. He'll report to my father." "Yes. Which means your father's counsel receives my father's version of events before we reach them," she said. "Everything we have becomes a counterclaim instead of a primary account." "I know," Kalen said again. He was quiet for a moment. "There's another way," he said. She looked at him. "Not the council," he said. "Not first." He held her gaze. "The border lords. There are 12 of them, 6 on each side of the Halvik corridor. They've been the ones bearing the actual cost of this war for 11 years. Their towns, their people, their supply lines." He paused. "If we bring the evidence to them simultaneously, not to one court or the other, but to all 12 at the same table, neither my father nor yours controls the frame. The lords hear it directly and they make the first public response." She thought about this, the shape of it, the specific leverage it created. "A joint convening," she said. "On neutral ground. Halvik Crossing," he said. "It sits exactly between the Voss and Draven territories. Neither side can claim jurisdictional authority there." He paused. "It's 5 days' ride. But Vane is going back to your father, not to the border lords. We move faster than the official account, and we bring what we have before either court has the chance to suppress it." She looked at him. "You'd be moving against your own father's court," she said. "My own father's court has had a traitor managing its intelligence operations for 11 years, he said. "I think we're past the point where I need to protect that institution from scrutiny." She thought about the letters against her chest, her mother's handwriting. The hope in it, the specific careful hope of a woman who believed she was close to something. She thought about what it would mean to finish it. 5 days, she said. 5 days, he said. She looked east, where Vane had withdrawn, and where somewhere beyond the visible horizon, her father was sitting on a throne he had built on manufactured war and dead women and 30 years of managed truth. She thought about what his face would look like when the border lords convened at Halvik Crossing with the inquiry documents and the provenance records, and her mother's letter in their hands, and no version of events controlled by his apparatus to set against it. She thought about standing in a room where the truth was finally louder than the story that had been built to contain it. "We ride tonight," she said. Tonight, Kaelin said. She turned back to the field, to the medics moving through the wounded, to the soldiers beginning the grim accounting work that followed every engagement, to the specific, real cost of a morning that had been bought with people's lives for the sake of something that was still unfinished. She thought, every one of these people deserves for the unfinished thing to get done. She thought, so do two women who died before they could finish it themselves. The thought settled in her chest beside the letters and the dried blood and the ache of the morning, and she let it stay there. She was going to need it for the 5 days ahead. She was still holding it when the rider came in from the north perimeter at full gallop. Not Draven colors, not Voss colors, a neutral livery she didn't recognize, and pulled up in front of them with the specific, breathless urgency of a man carrying news that cannot wait for ceremony. "Prince Draven," the rider said, barely getting the words through the effort of the hard ride. "Message from Lord Erevic, your father's council." Kaelin went still. "Lord Erevic convened the council 2 days ago," the rider said. "He had documents. He said—" The rider looked at Elyra, then back at Kaelin, clearly uncertain about the full audience for what he was carrying. "He said he's been holding them for 4 years, waiting for someone to ask the right questions." The cold morning air, the weight of what the rider had just said moving through both of them. Lord Erevic, the man Kaelin had told her to go to if anything happened to him. The man Kaelin had said hated Bryn from the beginning, hated him because he knew, had known for 4 years, had been waiting. "What did the council decide, Ketan?" Kaelin said. The rider looked at him steadily. "They've issued a formal summons," he said. "For you, and—" A pause. "For the daughter of King Elyra Voss. By name." The rider met Elyra's eyes for the first time. "Lord Erevic says to tell her that her mother's work is not forgotten, that there are people in the Draven court who have been holding the door open for 4 years and will hold it as long as it takes." The silence between them was complete. Elyra stood on the cold field with the letters against her chest and the morning's blood on her armor, and 5 days of hard riding ahead of her, and she felt something shift in the structure of everything she'd been carrying. Not lifted, not resolved, but changed in its weight, redistributed into the shape of something that had other hands under it. She looked at Kaelin. He was looking at her with the expression she finally had a word for. Not protection, not possession, not the calculating assessment of an ally evaluating an asset. Belief. He believed in what she was doing. He believed she was the right person to do it. He believed it the way you believe things you've tested under pressure and found sound. Not from hope, but from evidence. "We still ride tonight," she said. "Yes," he said. "But now we know where we're riding to." And from somewhere east of them, beyond the visible horizon, carried on the cold mountain wind, came the sound of a horn. Not a Draven horn, not a signal she recognized from any military protocol she had memorized. She looked at Kaelin. "Voss field commanders," he said, reading it. His expression changed. "That's a parley signal, not a retreat, not an advance." "Someone among my father's field commanders," she said slowly, "is calling for a parley." "After Vane just withdrew from a failed engagement," Kaelin said, "which means the field commanders are not following Vane." The horn again. Patient. Steady. Waiting for a response. Elyra looked at the sound and thought about what it meant when the machinery of a war started moving in directions its architects hadn't authorized. When the people who had been paying the actual price of the manufactured justification started making decisions the manufacturer hadn't planned for. She thought about 12 border lords who had been losing towns for 11 years. She thought about field commanders who were apparently no longer willing to follow Vane off a failed field. She thought about what it looked like when an empire began to fracture not at the top but at the seams. The places where real people had been absorbing the cost of someone else's strategy and had finally run out of the willingness to keep doing it. "Answer it," she said. Kaelin looked at her. "Answer the parley," she said. "Whatever field commander is out there signaling against Vane's orders, they deserve an answer." Kaelin held her gaze for one long moment. Then he turned to the signal officer at his right and gave the order. The Draven response horn rang out across the cold morning field. And in the silence that followed, waiting for whoever was on the other side of that signal to emerge from the eastern tree line and show themselves, Elyra Voss stood in the ruins of the morning's fight with the truth against her chest and the border lords ahead of her and the Draven court already moving. And she felt, for the first time since the servants' corridor, that the direction of the current had changed. Not won, not finished, not safe, but changed. And whoever was walking out of that tree line right now was either the next piece of what she was building or the thing that was going to make building it the hardest thing she had ever done. The figure who walked out of the eastern tree line was not a soldier. She was a woman in her 50s, wearing the gray traveling clothes of a Voss administrative official, and she walked across the open field between the two armies with the particular deliberateness of someone who has made a decision that cannot be unmade and has chosen to move through it without hesitation. She carried no weapon. She carried a document case, leather, sealed, the kind used for official correspondence. Elyra knew her. Lady Seren Aldrich, her father's senior court administrator, the woman who had managed the Silver Crown's internal documentation for 20 years, who had sat in every council meeting Elyra had ever been able to observe from the corridors, who had handed her father papers with the flat efficiency of someone doing a job that never asked her opinion and had never offered one. She stopped 20 feet from the Draven line and looked directly at Elyra. "Lady Voss," she said. Her voice was steady. "I've been waiting for this conversation for 4 years." The field held its silence. 200 soldiers on one side, the remnants of Vane's withdrawal still visible as dust on the eastern horizon, the horn's echo long gone, and this one woman standing in the space between. Elyra walked forward. She was aware of Kaelin moving with her, not in front, not behind, beside, and she did not tell him to stay back because she understood, without discussing it, that they had moved past the point where either of them operated alone. "Talk," Elyra said. Lady Seren set the document case on the ground and opened it. Inside were papers, a substantial stack, bound with cord, with the Silver Crown's administrative seal on the outer binding. "Your father ordered me to destroy these 6 months ago," Seren said. "I told him I had." She looked at the documents, then back at Elyra. "I didn't." She held them out. Elyra took them. They were correspondence records. Internal, the specific category of document that an administrative official generated when tracking the movement of orders through the Crown's internal system. Who authorized what, when, and through which channel. 20 years of it. She didn't need to read all of it. She read the top layer and understood the shape of what was underneath. Order authorizations. For operations that didn't appear in the military record. For payments to agents who didn't appear on the Crown payroll, for the specific category of action that her father had been running for 2 decades through a parallel structure entirely invisible to the official machinery of the kingdom, including the authorization for an operation in Voss territory dated 14 years ago, the year Kaelin's mother had gone to a meeting and not come back. She held the papers against her chest alongside the other letters, alongside her mother's handwriting and the inquiry records and the provenance documentation, and she felt the full weight of what she was holding. Not just paper, not just evidence, but the accumulated record of everything that had been done and hidden and paid for in lives that didn't get to choose. She looked at Lady Seren. "Why?" she said. The older woman was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the field between them. "Your mother was kind to me," Seren said, "when I first came to court. Before she died." She paused. "She was the only person in that building who asked me my name the first time we met rather than the third." Another pause. "That was 19 years ago. I've been carrying these since then and waiting to find out who to give them to." The simplicity of it. The long, patient wait of a woman who had spent 19 years holding documents in a document case and waiting for the moment to become available. This is what it looks like when ordinary people, inside corrupt systems, do the one small thing available to them and do it with absolute consistency for as long as it takes. Lady Seren had not been a revolutionary. She had not organized or conspired or built alliances. She had kept a document case and told a lie to a king when he asked her to destroy its contents. And that single, simple act of refusal, held for 19 years without being sure it would ever matter, had just changed everything. "Thank you," Elyra said. Lady Seren nodded once. She looked at the document case, now empty, and then she looked at the field around her. The Draven soldiers, the morning, the direction Vane's force had withdrawn. "There are others," she said, "inside the court. People who have been waiting to see which direction the ground was moving before they chose a side. She met Elyra's eyes. When word of Halvet crossing reaches them, they'll move. She turned and walked back toward the tree line. She didn't run. She walked with the same deliberateness she had come with, across the open field, until the trees took her back in. Kaelin stood beside Elyra and looked at the document she was holding and said nothing for a moment. "Halvet crossing," he said finally. "We don't wait 5 days." "No," she said. "We ride now." "Yes, Mum." They rode hard and arrived in 3 days, which cost them in exhausted horses and bodies that had not had enough sleep since the engagement 3 mornings prior, but the alternative was giving Vane more time to reach her father, and her father more time to move the machinery of official account building into position. Halvet Crossing was a market town that existed in the precise geographic ambiguity of border territory. Neither kingdom had ever formally claimed it because both kingdoms had always found it more useful as a neutral meeting point than as a possession. It had the specific character of places that belonged to everyone and no one. Practical, unpretentious, accustomed to the presence of people from both sides of a line that it technically straddled. The border lords were already there, not all 12, 9 of them, which was enough. They had received Kaelin's riders, and they had come, and the specific quality of their presence in the crossing's largest hall told Elyra everything she needed to know about the state of the border territories. These were not men who had ridden through 3 days of uncertain autumn weather because they were curious. They had ridden because they were done. Because 11 years of absorbing the cost of a war that ran on manufactured justification had used up every resource they had, including patience, and they had arrived at Halvet Crossing with the expressions of people who have run out of reasons to wait for someone else to fix what they can see as broken. Elyra laid the evidence on the table in front of them. Not all of it at once. She built it the way she had learned in the cold tent 3 nights ago that truth needed to be built, not as a revelation but as an accumulation, each piece earning its place by illuminating the one before it and preparing the ground for the one after. She began with the incident logs, the 3 operational signatures that didn't match Voss military doctrine. She explained what each one meant and how the cluster formed a pattern that individual incidents couldn't explain. She moved to the inquiry records, the provenance documentation for the weapons, the decommissioned depot, the fabricated transfer record, and what it demonstrated about the evidence that had been used to build the case for war. She set her mother's letter on the table. She did not read it aloud. She let the 9 lords read it themselves, and she watched the specific expression that moved through the room as they did. Not surprise, not outrage, but the specific quality of recognition, the face of people encountering a piece of evidence that confirmed something they had suspected but hadn't been able to name. She set Lady Saren's documents down last. 20 years of authorization records. A parallel operational structure running beneath the official machinery of the Silver Crown, funded and directed through channels that didn't appear in any public accounting, including the authorization dated 14 years ago. Kaelin was standing at the far end of the table. She did not look at him while she laid the last documents down. She kept her eyes on the lords, but she was aware of him the way she had become aware of him in the tent and on the field, as a presence that she had oriented to so completely that she registered him at the edges of everything, the way you register the position of ground when you're walking in the dark. One of the lords, an older man from the northern border territories, a man who had the specific weathering of someone whose land sat directly on the engagement corridor and had been paying for it, picked up the authorization record and read it twice. He set it down. 20 years, he said, not to anyone specific, to the room. Yes, Elyra said, he's been running this for 20 years. The war is 11 years old, she said. He was preparing the ground before it started. The Lord looked at the document in front of him. Then he looked at her. You're his daughter, he said. Yes, she said, and you're standing here. Yes, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. She held it back. She had been holding the gazes of people who expected her to look away for her entire life, and she was not going to stop now, not in this room, not at this table, not with everything she had ridden 3 days through cold roads to lay down in front of them. What do you want from us? He said. Authorization for a joint summit, she said. Both courts. Mandatory attendance. On neutral ground, with the evidence in the public record before either court has the opportunity to suppress it. and a joint declaration of intent to establish an independent inquiry into the founding incidents of the war, run by the border lords, not by either crown. The room was quiet. "You're asking us to move against both crowns simultaneously," said another lord. "I'm asking you to stop paying for a war that was designed to never end," she said. Yes. The deliberation took 3 hours. She was not in the room for most of it. The lords convened privately, as was their process, and she and Kaelin waited in the outer hall of the crossing's main building, sitting on a bench in the particular silence of people who have said everything they needed to say and are now waiting for the world to respond to it. The hall was cold. Someone had left a fire burning in the grate at the far end, insufficient for the size of the space, but better than nothing. Kaelin was sitting with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. She sat beside him with her back against the wall, looking at the ceiling. Both of them in the specific stillness of exhausted people who have used everything they had and are now in the gap between having used it and finding out if it was enough. "If they say no," he said. "They won't," she said. "If they do." She thought about it honestly. "Then we find the border lords who weren't here and we make the case again. And then we find the ones who still aren't convinced and we make it a third time." She paused. "The evidence doesn't change. The longer it exists and the more people have seen it, the harder it becomes to suppress." "That could take years," he said. "Yes," she said. "It could." He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother spent 2 years on the back channel," he said. "Yes." "Before she was killed for it?" "Yes." He looked at the floor. "I've spent 11 years answering her death with a war that was designed to start because of her death." The words came out flat, stripped of everything except their content. "Every engagement, every man I've lost, every town on both sides of the border that doesn't exist anymore." He paused. "All of it was built on a foundation someone laid specifically because she was getting close to something that would have made the foundation unnecessary." "Yes," she said. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't qualify it or reframe it. She let it be what it was because it deserved to be what it was. This is the particular weight of discovering that your grief was weaponized, that the thing that broke you was broken deliberately by someone who needed you broken and moving in a specific direction. It does not make the grief less real. It makes it more complicated, layers the loss with something that sits alongside it and is distinct from it, a different kind of pain that doesn't replace the first kind but adds to it. And the carrying of both together is one of the hardest things a person can be asked to do. Kaelin was doing it. She watched him do it, sitting in a cold hall waiting for 9 border lords to deliberate, with everything she had laid on that table still sitting there inside him alongside 11 years of fighting, and a mother who had died before he was old enough to understand why. "She would have liked this," he said finally. "What you did in there." Elyra looked at him. "My mother," he said. "She would have—" He stopped, started again. "She spent 2 years trying to get the right people in the same room with the truth. That's what you just did." She thought about the letter, the hope in it, the careful, specific hope of a woman who believed she was close and was writing to another woman she had found across a line that had been built to keep them apart. "So would mine," Elyra said. The door to the deliberation room opened. Ciao. The joint declaration was signed at Halvik Crossing on the 7th day of the 10th month. It was not a peace treaty. It did not end the war with the clean finality of a single document. What it did was more specific and more durable. It established the independent inquiry, placed the evidence into the public record of the border territories where neither court had jurisdictional authority to suppress it, and committed all 9 signatory lords to the mandatory joint summit within 30 days. The news reached the Silver Crown Palace in 4 days. Elyra knew this because she was there when it arrived. She had ridden back not to the Draven camp, not to neutral ground, but to the Silver Crown Palace itself, because the summit required her father's presence, and her father was not going to come to the summit unless someone made going the less dangerous option. She arrived with Kaelin at her side and Lord Ervik's written authorization and the signed declaration from the border lords and the complete evidence record in a case that she carried herself. And she walked through the gate of the palace she had grown up in with the specific quality of movement of a person who has stopped performing anything and is simply present in a space and intends to remain in it. The guards at the gate recognized her. They did not stop her. This said something. She noted it without stopping. The court was in session when she reached the main hall. A formal sitting, the full council assembled, her father on the throne at the far end with the expression of a man who has been managing a crisis for 10 days and is running low on the mechanisms of management. He saw her when she came through the doors. She had thought about this moment on the road. She had thought about what she would feel and how she would manage the feeling and what she would say and in what order. She had built a structure for it in her mind, a careful architecture of approach. All of it fell away when she saw his face, not because of what was in it, because of what wasn't. There was no surprise. He had known she was coming. The speed of information between Halvek Crossing and the palace meant he'd had days to prepare. He had known she was coming and he had chosen to be here, in the throne room, in full session, with the full council assembled around him. He had chosen the throne. This is what power looks like when it has nothing left except itself. Not confidence. She had seen his confidence, and this was not it. This was the specific, brittle quality of a man who has been reduced to the one resource he has left, which is the symbol of the thing he started with, and is sitting inside it because there is nowhere else to go. She walked to the center of the room. She did not bow. The silence in the room had the quality of a held breath. The full council, the attendants, the guards, all of them existing in the specific suspension of people watching a situation that they have not been given instructions for. Elyra, her father said, just her name. The way you say the name of something you thought you'd controlled. Your Majesty, she said. The title without deference. Just the title. She set the document case on the floor in front of the throne. She opened it, and she took the evidence out piece by piece, and she set each piece on the stone floor between them, and she named each one as she set it down. The incident logs, the inquiry records, the provenance documentation, the authorization records from Lady Seren, her mother's letter. Each piece on the stone, each one named, each one lying there in the light of the throne room, witnessed by the full council, irretrievable. The independent inquiry authorized by the border lords, she said, convenes in 22 days. The joint summit follows 1 week after. The evidence is in the public record of the Halvek Crossing Border Authority, which means it exists outside the jurisdictional reach of this court or the Draven Court. She looked at her father. You can refuse to attend the summit. That is still within your authority. What you cannot do is make this evidence go away. Her father looked at the documents on the floor. He looked at them for a long time. There's a specific moment in the life of a conspiracy when it passes the point at which its architect can manage it. It doesn't usually announce itself. It arrives gradually through the accumulation of things that exist in the world and cannot be made to unexist. People who have seen the documents, lords who have signed declarations, evidence that lives in archives outside your control. The conspiracy doesn't end in that moment, but something changes. The person who built it feels the shift from maintenance to survival, and the quality of their attention changes, and the people watching them can see it. Elyra watched her father feel the shift. He looked at her with eyes that were still her father's eyes. She could not make them not that, could not look at his face and see only the architect of 20 years of manufactured war, and not also the specific person whose face she had memorized before she understood what he was. Both things were true simultaneously, and she had known they would be, and she had prepared for it, and she found that preparation was insufficient, as preparation for the specific weight of grief usually is. You don't understand what you've done, he said. I understand exactly what I've done, she said. The kingdom has been paying for a war you built to maintain your control of it for 11 years, she said. The kingdom is what I'm trying to give back to the people it belongs to. He looked at her. His jaw was set in the specific way she recognized. The face he made when he had decided something and was moving the decision through the machinery of implementation. She had seen it her entire life. She had always read it as certainty. She read it now as what it actually was. The face of a man deciding between options when the options have all been narrowed to the ones that remain. After everything better has been removed. You will not have my attendance at this summit, he said. That's your choice, she said. The Border Lord's declaration is binding on the inquiry regardless. Your attendance determines whether you have representation in the process, not whether the process happens. The council around them was very still. She was aware of them. The specific quality of people who are witnessing something that will define what they do next, watching to see how the weight settles before they decide which side they're standing on. One of the senior council members, a man named Heron, who had been on the council since before Elyra was born, stood up from his seat. "My Lord King," Heron said carefully, "the Border Lord's authority in this matter is established by treaty. The Crown's legal standing to contest the inquiry convening is," he paused, "limited." Her father looked at Heron, the specific look of a man noting a defection. Heron did not sit back down. And then, one by one, with the specific gravity of individual choices accumulating into an irreversible collective weight, 3 other council members rose from their seats. Not speaking, not declaring, just standing. This is what the end of a particular kind of power looks like. Not a dramatic collapse, not a confrontation at the gates. A room full of people who have been waiting to see which direction the ground was moving, seeing it move, and deciding to stand with it. 4 council members standing in silence in the throne room of the Silver Crown Palace, while the evidence of 20 years of manufactured war lay on the stone floor between the king and his daughter. Her father looked at the 4 standing men. He looked at the documents on the floor. He looked at Elyra, and she saw, in his face, the moment of a man who has looked at every remaining option and found that none of them are the ones he would have chosen. The specific quality of a person who has spent their life believing that the next decision would restore the control they were losing, discovering that there is no next decision with that capability, that the control is simply gone, the way things go when too many people have seen what's underneath them. He did not capitulate. She had not expected him to. He was not built for capitulation any more than she was. What he did was sit in the silence for a long time and look at the floor, and then he said very quietly, "Leave me." To the council, to the attendants, to the guards. They went. All of them. The trained deference of a court that has been responding to that voice for 20 years moved them out of the room before the political calculation of the moment could compete with it. Kaelin moved to the doorway and stopped. Elyra looked at him. He held her gaze for a moment, and then he stepped out. She was alone with her father. The throne room was very large and very quiet. The documents lay on the floor between them. The light came through the high windows the way it always had, the same winter light she had grown up watching move across stone floors and corridors where she ate alone. "She opposed you," Elyra said. Her mother. She didn't say the name, there was only one she. Her father looked at the documents. "Yes," he said. "And you were afraid of her." A long pause. "She would have undone everything," he said. "Everything you'd built on the wrong foundation," Elyra said. "Yes, she would have." He looked at her then. Really looked. The specific quality of attention of a man who has stopped managing what he's showing and is simply looking. She saw in his face the thing she had never been able to locate when she was younger, when she had still been looking for it. Not love exactly. Something more complicated. Something that contained both what she had meant to him and what she had reminded him of. And the specific anguish of a man for whom those 2 things had been irreconcilable for 19 years. "She's in you," he said. "She always was." "I know," Elyra said. "I couldn't—" He stopped. She waited. He didn't finish it. Some things are too old and too tangled to be finished in a single sentence in a room where everything has already been lost. She understood that. She did not press it. She picked up her mother's letter from the floor. She looked at the handwriting. The tight, precise script, the specific way certain letters were formed, the hope that lived in the careful phrasing of a woman who believed she was close to something. She set it on the arm of the throne, not for him, for herself, for the act of placing it somewhere that wasn't the floor, somewhere that acknowledged that the woman who had written it had mattered and had existed and had done something worth doing. She turned and walked toward the door. "Elyra." She stopped, did not turn. "The summit," he said. His voice was different now, older. The voice of a man who has set down something very heavy and is discovering what his body feels like without the weight. "I'll send representation." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Send yourself," she said. "It's time." She walked through. The joint summit convened 29 days later at Halvet Crossing, in the same hall where the declaration had been signed. Both crowns sent representation. Her father came himself, in the end, not with the throne ceremony, not with the full apparatus of royal performance, but with a small retinue and the specific quality of a man who has decided to be present for something he would have preferred not to witness, because presence was still a form of agency and he had not entirely let go. The inquiry ran for 6 weeks. It was not clean, and it was not simple, and it did not produce the neat resolution that story prefers to reality. There were disputes about jurisdiction and arguments about the weight of specific documents, and 3 occasions where the proceedings nearly collapsed under the pressure of competing interests. They held. Bryn was found in a Voss border town in the 3rd week of the inquiry. He had been living under a different name with the practiced invisibility of a man who had spent decades managing information and had simply applied the same skill to his own disappearance. He was brought to the inquiry under the border lord's authority, and he testified, in the end, not because he was compelled to, but because the evidence had accumulated to the point where testimony was the only remaining form of relevance available to him. He named Vane. He named the operations. He confirmed the authorization records from Lady Saren's case. He said, at the end of his testimony, that he had been following orders for so long that he had stopped examining who was giving them and why. He said this without apparent expectation of sympathy, with the flat honesty of a man who has passed through whatever he was feeling about his own history and arrived at simple statement. Elyra sat across from him during his testimony, and she thought about what it meant to follow orders for so long that you stopped examining them. She thought about every person in the Silver Crown Palace who had known, to varying degrees, what they were serving, and had continued to serve it. Not because they were evil, but because the alternative required a form of courage that not everyone finds, and most people are never pressed hard enough to discover whether they have it. She thought about Lady Saren and her document case, sitting in an administrative office for 19 years. She thought about the specific bravery of small, unremarkable refusals held for a very long time. General Vane did not testify. He was found in the 5th week of the inquiry, dead in a field camp 2 days' ride east of the crossing. The official finding was that he had taken his own life. She did not know whether that was true. She had learned in the past 2 months that the truth of individual events was often less legible than the truth of patterns, and she held that finding with the appropriate uncertainty and moved on. None. The inquiry concluded on a cold day in the 1st week of winter, with a formal finding that the founding incidents of the war had been deliberately manufactured, and that the evidence supporting 11 years of hostilities between the Voss and Draven kingdoms had been fabricated and maintained by a coordinated operation running through the intelligence apparatus of the Silver Crown. The finding did not end the war. Wars do not end because their justifications are found to be false. What the finding did was remove the official framework that had given the war its continued legitimacy, which meant that everyone who continued supporting it was now doing so without the cover of righteous cause, which was a position that most of them found, on reflection, less comfortable than the alternative. The formal cessation of hostilities was agreed 40 days after the inquiry's conclusion. Elyra was present for the signing. She sat at the table with the border lords and the Draven Council representatives and her father's representatives. He did not sign himself, which was a form of refusal she had expected and accepted as the limit of what was possible. What was possible was enough. She had learned over the past months the specific discipline of accepting what was possible without grieving too long over what wasn't. Kalen signed for the Draven crown. He sat across from her at the table and he signed his name and set down the pen and looked at her with the expression she had a full vocabulary for now. Belief, specifically, the kind built on tested evidence. And she looked back at him and thought about a field at dawn, and a helmet coming off, and a man who had looked at her like she was something he hadn't planned for. She thought about everything that had been built in the space between that moment and this one. Not easily, not cleanly. Built the way real things are built, through sustained effort in bad conditions with inadequate resources, through the willingness to keep going when the going was the only thing available, through the specific quality of 2 people who had each decided, independently and then together, that the unfinished work was worth finishing. The document was signed. The room let out a collective breath that had been held for 11 years. She went back to the palace in the spring. Not as a princess. That title had been formally restored as part of the inquiry's remediation framework, but she didn't use it. She had stopped needing a title to walk into rooms. She went as herself, which was the only version of herself she had left and the only one she wanted. She went to the stable first. Cass was there. He was treating a saddle when she came through the doors, the same saddle oil and the same unhurried motion of hands that knew their work. He looked up when she came in and then went back to what he was doing. "Storm's walking clean now," he said. "Left finally settled right." "Good," she said. She stood in the stable for a while in the smell of horses and hay. The gray destrier was in the third stall. Ash, who she had brought back from the front and left in Cass's care when the riding had become something that required faster horses. He regarded her with his standard expression of disapproval. She went in and stood with him for a while. She thought about the morning she had taken him out, the bread she'd put down in the corridor, the 19 years of eating alone and looking away and surviving rooms designed to make survival feel like the most you could ask for. She thought about what she had asked for instead. She thought about what it had cost and what it had built, and what the difference was between a price you pay and a price that's taken from you. And she thought the difference was whether you chose it, and she had chosen everything she had paid for, and she did not regret the cost. She rested her hand on Ash's neck. He didn't bite her. That was, from him, essentially affection. "Good boy," she said. She walked back out into the spring morning. Kaylin was waiting in the courtyard. He had let her have the stable, understood without being told that some things needed to be done alone first. He was leaning against the courtyard wall with the easy physicality of a man comfortable in his own stillness, watching the morning. She came and stood beside him. "Council meets tomorrow," he said. "Joint session, first one." "I know," she said. "It's going to be a long day." "Most of them are," she said. He looked at her. The light in the courtyard was the specific gold of early spring, the kind that made everything look like it had been cleaned, and it was on his face and on the courtyard stones and on the walls of the building that had made her smaller for 19 years and no longer could. "Your mother would have been at that table," he said. "Yes," she said, "and yours. They'd have run it better than we will." "Probably," she said. "We'll get better at it." He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. The way you take the hand of someone whose presence you have stopped performing for and started simply being beside. The quiet, grounded gesture of two people who have been through enough together that the gesture doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. She held it. She stood in the spring morning of the palace that had made her invisible and thought about what it meant to have made herself visible anyway. Not by being louder or bigger or more than she was. By being exactly what she was, completely, in every room that expected her to be less. This is the truth that cannot be handed to anyone. That the people who survive their own erasure and come back for more are not people who found some new version of themselves that was stronger than the thing that tried to erase them. They are people who found that what they already were was enough. That the person who ate in the corridor and trained in the armory alone and read dispatches she wasn't supposed to have and learned to hold suspicions as suspicions and to move when everything said freeze. That person was always the person they were going to have to be. The erasure didn't create that person. The erasure just failed to destroy her. She had always been exactly this. The palace had just never been paying attention. She looked out at the courtyard and the spring morning and the world that was going to require a very long time and a great deal of difficult work to rebuild into something that could hold people the way they deserved to be held. She thought, good. She had always worked better with long projects. She thought about her mother's letter. She had given it to the Inquiry's archive, where it now lived in the public record alongside everything else, a piece of evidence, a historical document, something that would be read by people who came after and who would know that someone had hoped and been close and had written about it carefully. She thought, the work your mother didn't finish is the work you do. That's how it goes. That's how the unfinished things move through time. Not abandoned, not lost, but carried forward by the people who came after, who found the thread where it ended and picked it up and kept going. She was holding the thread. She was going to keep going. Tomorrow, Kaylin said. Tomorrow, she said. She stood in the spring courtyard and she breathed the morning in and she let it settle into the space in her chest alongside everything else she had been carrying, and she found, with the specific surprise of someone encountering something they hadn't prepared for, that there was room for it. That there was, finally, room for something other than the work of survival. That the survival had succeeded and the space it left behind was not empty, but open. Open the way a field is open after a long winter. When the ground is ready and the season has changed And the thing that grows next is not determined yet by anything except what's planted and how well it's tended. She intended to tend it well. She turned toward the door and the council that would meet tomorrow, and the long, necessary, imperfect work of building something true in the place where something false had stood for 20 years. And she walked through the spring morning with the thread in her hands and her feet on the ground and every version of herself that had survived to get here walking with her. The girl in the corridor, the soldier on the road, the woman in the tent, the daughter at the table, all of them present. None of them gone, only added to, only made more complete. She walked through the door.